1. The favor that forges a friend. Conventional wisdom tells us that if you want someone to like you, you should shower them with kindness and favors. But a fascinating quirk of human psychology, known as the Ben Franklin effect, suggests the opposite might be even more powerful. Get someone to do you a small favor, and they will often end up liking you more. This counterintuitive principle reveals that our attitudes often follow our actions, rather than the other way around. Our brains strive for consistency, and sometimes, the easiest way to justify helping someone we didn't initially like is to simply decide we must like them, after all. The effect gets its name from Benjamin Franklin himself, who detailed a brilliant social maneuver in his autobiography. Faced with a political rival who actively disliked him and had spoken against him, Franklin didn't try to appease the man or argue with him. Instead, he employed a subtle psychological strategy. Knowing the rival possessed a rare and valuable book in his personal library, Franklin sent a polite note asking if he could borrow it for a few days. The man, perhaps flattered by the request appealing to his intellectual vanity, agreed. When Franklin returned the book promptly with a warm ledger of gratitude, something remarkable happened. The next time they met in the Legislative Assembly, the rival approached Franklin, spoke to him with civility and respect, and from that day forward, they developed a friendly relationship. Why did this work? The rival experienced cognitive dissonance. He held two conflicting ideas. I dislike Franklin, and I just went out of my way to do him a favor. This mental clash creates discomfort. To resolve it, the brain often takes the path of least resistance. Instead of admitting the inconsistency or changing the memory of the action, it adjusts the attitude. I must not dislike Franklin as much as I thought. In fact, perhaps I respect him. Why else would I have lent him my prized book? The act of kindness forced a re-evaluation of the relationship. This principle suggests that asking for help, something often avoided due to pride, can paradoxically build stronger connections. When someone invests even a small amount of effort in you, their brain works to rationalize that investment. They become subtly more committed to your well-being because their self-perception is now tied, in a small way, to having helped you. Of course, manipulators can exploit this. By making small, seemingly innocent requests, borrowing notes, asking for advice, needing a small favor, they can plant seeds of obligation and false loyalty, making you feel indebted or connected simply because you comply. Recognizing this effect allows you to both build genuine rapport ethically and spot when it's being used to subtly entangle your emotions. 2. The invisible third wheel. Imagine a relationship where you feel constantly compared, subtly undermined, or forced into a silent competition you never signed up for. This unsettling dynamic often involves triangulation, a manipulative psychological strategy where a third person, real or imagined, is introduced into a two-person relationship to create instability, jealousy, and ultimately, control. It's a way for one person to maintain dominance by pulling the strings from the center, ensuring the other two parties are too busy vying for their approval or fighting each other to notice the real puppet master. This tactic thrives on indirect communication, gossip, and strategic comparisons, making it incredibly insidious and hard to confront directly. At its core, triangulation shatters the intimacy and trust of a direct relationship. Instead of communicating openly, the manipulator filters information through a third party or uses that third party as a point of reference to devalue you. A partner might constantly mention how wonderful their close friend is, subtly implying you don't measure up. A boss might praise one employee's performance excessively in front of another, not to motivate, but to breed resentment and insecurity. A parent might tell one sibling what the other sibling supposedly said about them, twisting words just enough to sow discord while they remain the central confidant. The power of triangulation lies in the emotional chaos it creates. You start feeling insecure, jealous, or inadequate, but the source of the discomfort seems external. It feels like the problem is the third person, the rival, This misdirection is precisely what the manipulator wants. This misdirection is precisely what the manipulator wants. While you are focused on the perceived competitor, the manipulator avoids accountability and strengthens their position as the desired prize. You find yourself working harder to win their favor, prove your worth, or expose the other person, all while becoming more emotionally dependent on the very individual orchestrating your distress. What makes triangulation so damaging is the way it erodes your sense of reality. The manipulator often plays innocent, claiming they never intended to cause hurt or comparison. You're just being sensitive, or why are you so insecure? They might say, gaslighting you into believing your reaction is the problem, not their behavior. You are left feeling confused, paranoid, and isolated, doubting your own perceptions. The more you seek clarity or try to confront the issue, the deeper you fall into the web, because the manipulator controls the flow of information and interpretation. Recognizing triangulation means understanding that the issue is rarely the third point of the triangle. It's the person who put it there. 3. The relief that binds. Imagine being trapped in a room where an annoying, grating alarm sound is constantly blaring. It wears you down, makes you anxious, and prevents you from thinking clearly. Then, you discover a button. Pressing it stops the noise, flooding you with a profound sense of peace and relief. But the alarm inevitably starts again, and soon, your entire focus narrows to one thing: pressing that button. This scenario illustrates the insidious power of the negative reinforcement loop. It is a psychological manipulation tactic that controls behavior not by offering positive rewards, but by strategically removing a source of discomfort or pain after compliance. Relief itself becomes the reward, conditioning you to obey simply to escape the suffering inflicted by the manipulator. This technique is dangerously effective because it often doesn't look like overt control. It mimics the natural human drive to seek comfort and avoid pain. The manipulator first creates an aversive state, perhaps through criticism, silent treatment, passive aggression, manufactured chaos, or simply withdrawing affection. You feel anxious, guilty, stressed, or afraid. Then the moment you apologize, concede, or change your behavior to match their unspoken demands, the negative stimulus disappears. They become warm again, praise you, or act as if nothing happened. Your brain, desperate to avoid the previous discomfort, latches onto the pattern. Compliance equals relief. This creates a powerful, often subconscious, conditioning cycle. Over time, you learn to anticipate the manipulator's moods and triggers. You start walking on eggshells, suppressing your own needs, opinions, and even your personality to avoid setting off the alarm. You're not acting out of love or agreement. You're acting out of preemptive fear. The manipulator rarely needs to explicitly state their demands because the loop trains you to figure them out and comply automatically. The rules might even shift constantly, keeping you perpetually anxious and focused on securing that fleeting moment of peace. In toxic relationships, workplaces, or families, this loop becomes the primary mechanism of power. The manipulator maintains control without resorting to obvious aggression. They simply make you feel bad when you assert yourself and make the bad feeling go away when you submit. The most damaging aspect is how it warps your emotional compass. You begin to associate peace and safety, not with genuine connection or respect, but with silence and surrender. You might even feel grateful to the manipulator for periods of calm, forgetting they were the one who caused the storm. The escape from pain becomes the very thing that keeps you trapped. 4. The emotional slot machine. Why do people stay in relationships where affection is inconsistent, unpredictable, and often followed by periods of coldness or cruelty? Why is it so hard to walk away from someone who gives you just enough hope to keep you hooked, but never enough stability to feel secure? The answer lies in one of the most powerful psychological mechanisms ever discovered: intermittent reinforcement. This is a manipulation tactic that creates intense emotional addiction, not through constant rewards, but through rewards delivered randomly and unpredictably. It operates on the same principle that makes slot machines and gambling so compelling, turning the pursuit of love, approval, or attention into a desperate, high-stakes game. Imagine someone showers you with intense affection, validation, and charm. The idealization phase. You feel seen, cherished, perhaps more alive than ever before. Then suddenly, and often without explanation, they pull away. They become distant, critical, dismissive, or even cruel. You're left reeling, confused, anxious, desperately trying to figure out what you did wrong and how to regain their favor. Just when you feel utterly hopeless or about to give up, they switch back. They offer a moment of warmth, a flash of the old self, a compliment, or a grand gesture of affection. Your brain is flooded with relief and dopamine, not necessarily from the reward itself, but from the cessation of pain and the anticipation that things might finally get better. That unpredictable win is incredibly potent. Unlike consistent reinforcement, where predictable rewards build trust and security, intermittent reinforcement builds obsession. Because you never know when the next positive interaction will come, your brain stays in a state of high alert, constantly seeking patterns and trying to figure out the magic formula to earn the reward again. This creates a powerful dopamine loop driven by anticipation, not satisfaction. You become addicted to the possibility of the reward, much like a gambler pulling the lever on a slot machine, convinced the next pull will be the jackpot. In relationships, this dynamic turns toxic partners into puppet masters of your emotional state. They control the highs and lows, keeping you perpetually off balance and focused entirely on them. You cling to the memory of the intense highs, using them to justify enduring the devastating lows. You excuse their behavior because you're starved for the intermittent crumbs of affection they offer. This isn't love. It's a meticulously crafted addiction cycle. The unpredictability makes the connection feel incredibly intense and difficult to break, even when you logically know it's destroying you. You crave the very person causing the pain, trapped by the hope that the next interaction will finally bring back the feeling you're so desperately chasing. 5. The unspoken contract. Have you ever had someone consistently go above and beyond for you, offering help, showering you with attention, seemingly sacrificing their own needs for yours, only to later erupt in resentment or passive aggression when you didn't reciprocate in a way they expected? This confusing and frustrating dynamic is often driven by covert contracts, unspoken, one-sided agreements that exist only in the mind of the giver. They operate on the hidden assumption: if I do X for you, be nice, help you, listen to you, then you are obligated to do Y for me, give me affection, loyalty, sex, or meet my unspoken needs. The expectation is never clearly stated, but the sense of entitlement is absolute. Someone operating under a covert contract might appear incredibly generous and supportive on the surface. They might be the friend who always listens, the partner who handles all the chores, or the colleague who constantly helps out. Their actions seem selfless, but underneath, an invisible ledger is being kept. They are accruing points based on their perceived sacrifices, believing these points entitle them to a specific payoff from you, a payoff they feel too insecure, afraid, or manipulative to ask for directly. The trap springs when you inevitably fail to fulfill your end of this secret bargain you never knew existed. Perhaps you set a boundary, made a decision they didn't like, or simply didn't read their mind about what they wanted in return. Instead of expressing their disappointment directly, they resort to manipulation. They might withdraw affection, become cold and distant, sigh heavily, make passive-aggressive remarks, or engage in guilt-tripping. After everything I've done for you becomes their silent accusation. You're left baffled and defensive, trying to understand what you did wrong, while they feel righteously indignant that you violated the terms of their hidden contract. This tactic turns kindness into a form of emotional blackmail. The love and support you received feel conditional, like bait used to lure you into an obligation. It creates a profound sense of betrayal on both sides. The manipulator feels cheated because their unspoken expectations weren't met, and you feel betrayed because the affection wasn't genuine, but transactional. If confronted, the manipulator will often deny ever expecting anything, painting themselves as the selfless martyr and you as ungrateful or paranoid. This leaves you trapped, apologizing for failing to uphold a contract you never signed. Recognizing covert contracts requires paying attention not just to people's actions, but to the unspoken expectations and resentments that may fester beneath the surface of their generosity. 6. The empathy ambush. Imagine a salesperson approaching you, not with a pitch, but with a simple, friendly question. Hi, how are you feeling today? It seems innocuous, a standard social pleasantry. You respond politely, perhaps saying, I'm doing well, thanks. In that brief exchange, a subtle psychological trap has just been sprung. This is the foot-in-the-mouth technique, a surprisingly effective manipulation method that increases compliance by first appealing to your sense of well-being and social consistency before making a request. It creates a moment of perceived connection and positive affirmation that makes it psychologically harder for you to say no immediately afterward. Here's how the ambush works. The initial question about your well-being serves several purposes. Firstly, it softens your defenses. Instead of seeing the person as someone trying to sell you something or ask for a favor, you perceive them, momentarily, as someone showing polite interest. Secondly, it prompts you to make a statement about your current state. Most people, due to social convention, will respond positively, fine, good, okay, even if they're not feeling particularly great. This verbal affirmation creates a small but significant psychological commitment. Immediately after you've affirmed your positive state, the manipulator makes their request. Now, your brain faces a subtle conflict. You've just stated that you're doing well. Logically, someone who is doing well should be capable of helping, agreeable, or in a position to consider a request. Saying no immediately after saying I'm fine creates a feeling of inconsistency and social awkwardness. You don't want to appear uncooperative, ungrateful, or as though your initial response was dishonest. That slight pressure, that desire to maintain social grace and consistency, is often enough to tip the scales toward compliance. You agree to listen to the pitch, donate the dollar, or grant the small favor, partly because refusing feels momentarily uncomfortable. This tactic plays directly on our deeply ingrained social conditioning around politeness and helpfulness. It turns your own positive self-presentation into a lever against you. While often used in low-stakes situations like sales or fundraising, understanding this technique is crucial. It highlights how even seemingly innocent social rituals can be strategically employed to lower our guard. The defense is simple awareness. Recognize that the initial friendly inquiry might be a setup. Pause before agreeing to the request that follows, and remind yourself that your well-being and your willingness to comply are two entirely separate issues. You have the right to say no, regardless of how you answered the first question. 7. The rebel's leash. We are creatures fiercely protective of our autonomy. The moment we feel cornered, controlled, or told what to do, a rebellious instinct kicks in. This deep-seated need to assert our freedom is called reactance, and while it's a vital part of our psychological makeup, it can also be cleverly weaponized against us through reverse psychology, also known as inversion. This manipulative technique involves suggesting or advocating for the opposite of what you actually want someone to do, knowing that their desire to resist your suggestion will paradoxically lead them directly to your intended outcome. It's a subtle mind game where you gain control by pretending to relinquish it. The brilliance of reverse psychology lies in its exploitation of our predictable defiance. If you're dealing with someone particularly stubborn, independent, or resistant to authority, like a teenager or a strong-willed colleague, directly telling them what to do is often the least effective approach. It triggers their reactance, and they'll push back simply to prove they can't be controlled. The manipulator understands this. Instead of pushing, they pull. Suppose you want your friend to apply for a competitive job you think they'd be perfect for, but you know they're insecure. A direct suggestion, you should really go for it, might be met with defensiveness. But using reverse psychology, you might say that job looks interesting, but it's probably too competitive. Maybe not worth the effort for you. Suddenly, their ego is engaged. Their desire to prove you wrong, to show they are capable, overrides their insecurity. The idea now feels like their act of defiance, not your suggestion. They pursue the job feeling empowered and in control, never realizing they walked into the exact scenario you subtly orchestrated. This tactic is prevalent in sales. This high-performance model probably isn't for everyone. And even in relationships, you're probably right. Maybe we shouldn't get serious. We're making something seem slightly out of reach or disapprove of magically increases its desirability. The dark genius of this technique lies in its plausible deniability. If confronted, the manipulator can always say, "I never told you to do that. In fact, I advised against it." They lead you while pretending to follow, guiding your choices with invisible strings attached to your own resistance. The victim feels clever for defying the suggestion, never realizing their rebellion itself was the leash. 8. The weaponized silence. Gaslighting is often associated with blatant lies and denials, but one of its most insidious and damaging forms operates in silence. Gaslighting by omission is a cruel psychological manipulation, where the abuser controls your perception of reality, not by what they say, but by what they don't say. They intentionally withhold key pieces of information, leaving out critical details that, if known, would completely change your understanding of a situation, a person, or their own actions. This calculated silence creates a distorted reality, causing you to doubt your memory, your intuition, and ultimately, your sanity. It often begins subtly, with a nagging feeling that things don't quite add up. A partner recounts their evening but conveniently leaves out who they were with. A colleague explains a project's failure, but omits their own crucial mistake. You sense inconsistencies, gaps in the narrative, but there's no concrete lie to point to. When you question them, seeking clarity, you're met with calm deflection, feigned confusion, or subtle accusations. "I didn't think that part was important. You must have misunderstood." Or the classic, "Why are you always looking for problems?" Because they haven't technically lied, you have no solid ground to stand on. You're left fighting shadows, trying to prove the significance of the missing pieces, which makes you look and feel paranoid. Gaslighting by omission thrives by creating information asymmetry. The manipulator holds all the cards, carefully curating the narrative they feed you, providing just enough truth to seem credible while withholding the parts that would expose their deception or empower you to make different choices. They might leave out context, erase timelines, omit names, or skip over their own motivations, all while maintaining an air of innocence or even helpfulness. This leaves you in a perpetual state of confusion, feeling like you're losing your grip on reality, when in fact, reality is being deliberately hidden from you. This form of manipulation is particularly damaging because it leaves no fingerprints. How do you argue against silence? How do you prove what wasn't said? The burden falls entirely on you, and the confusion often turns inward. You start blaming yourself, questioning your perception, and becoming hypervigilant, desperately searching for the truth they strategically conceal. Over time, you might stop asking questions altogether, convincing yourself that if something were truly wrong, they would tell you, but they won't. The silence isn't an oversight, it's the weapon. And it's that weaponized silence that slowly erodes your reality, one crucial omission at a time. 9. The invasion of meaning. Words are not just labels, they are frames. They don't just describe reality. They actively shape how we perceive it. Semantic infiltration is a subtle yet powerful manipulation tactic that exploits this fact. It involves strategically introducing specific, often emotionally loaded or ideologically biased, terms into everyday communication until those words quietly infiltrate your thinking, alter your emotional responses, and shift your entire worldview without you ever realizing you've been persuaded. The goal isn't to win an argument with facts. It's to change the very language of the debate so that your opponent's perspective feels like common sense. This tactic is a favorite tool of propagandists, political movements, cult leaders, advertisers, and even individual manipulators who understand that controlling the language means controlling the narrative. Think about how framing works. Is it a tax increase or a revenue enhancement? Is it enhanced interrogation or torture? Is an undocumented immigrant an illegal alien or an asylum seeker? Each term carries a different emotional weight and primes a different cognitive response. When a particular term is repeated often enough, it starts to feel neutral, normal, even correct. You begin using the manipulator's language yourself, and in doing so you unconsciously adopt their frame of reference. Consider how this plays out in personal relationships. An abuser doesn't call their control domination. They call it having high standards or tough love. They don't label their criticism verbal abuse. They call it brutal honesty. When you start accepting these terms, your perception shifts. Tough love sounds necessary, even beneficial. High standards seem admirable. You stop seeing the behavior for what it is because the language used to describe it has sanitized its toxicity. The manipulator labels your boundary selfishness, your valid anger drama, and your request for respect neediness. If you accept these labels, even just internally, you begin to doubt your right to have those feelings or needs. What makes semantic infiltration so effective is its stealth. There are no overt threats or demands, just the slow, steady replacement of neutral language with loaded terms. It operates below the radar of critical thinking. By the time you feel uncomfortable or realize your values have shifted, you can't pinpoint why. The manipulation wasn't in the arguments. It was embedded in the very words used to have them. The defense against this is linguistic vigilance. Pay attention to the words people use, especially emotionally charged labels. Question them. Ask, is this term accurate and neutral, or is it designed to frame the situation in a particular way? By refusing to unconsciously adopt loaded language, you can maintain control over your own cognitive map. 10. Death by 1,000 cuts. Healthy relationships are built on mutual respect for boundaries, the invisible lines that define our personal space, our emotional limits, and our sense of self. Boundary erosion is a manipulative tactic that aims to systematically dismantle these defenses, not through a single, aggressive assault, but through a slow, relentless series of small, seemingly insignificant violations. It's like water carving stone. Each individual transgression might seem minor, but over time, they wear away your resolve, normalize disrespect, and leave you vulnerable and exposed without you fully realizing how it happened. It rarely starts with a major offense. Instead, it begins with something small that makes you slightly uncomfortable. A slightly inappropriate joke, a request that pushes your limits just a little, a comment that feels subtly critical. You might feel a flicker of unease, but you hesitate to speak up. Maybe you don't want to seem difficult, sensitive, or confrontational. Perhaps they laugh it off, apologize insincerely, or gaslight you by saying you're overreacting. So you let it slide, but that moment establishes a new baseline. The line has been subtly moved. The next violation goes a tiny bit further. Maybe they borrow something without asking. Check your phone jokingly, make a critical comment about your appearance, or pressure you into doing something you're not comfortable with, framing it as no big deal. Each time you fail to enforce your boundary, or each time your enforcement is ignored or trivialized, the boundary weakens. Your inner voice, the one that initially whispered, "This doesn't feel right," grows quieter. You start to doubt your own judgment. Maybe I am too sensitive. maybe this is normal. This gradual desensitization is the core of the manipulation. The abuser never needs to make a dramatic leap. They just keep applying steady, incremental pressure. They often frame their invasions as acts of love or concern. I only read your messages because I care about you, or you don't need privacy if you have nothing to hide. Over time, you internalize this distorted logic. You begin apologizing for having needs, feeling guilty for wanting space, and second-guessing your right to say no. You find yourself tolerating behaviors that would have horrified you months or years earlier. Your sense of self becomes compromised, your defenses dismantled, not by force, but by 1,000 tiny cuts. Recognizing this pattern is crucial. Boundary erosion is manipulation in slow motion, and the only way to stop it is to reinforce your lines clearly and consistently, no matter how small the initial violation may seem. 11. The love that cages. Imagine meeting someone and feeling an instant, overwhelming connection unlike anything you've ever experienced. Within days, perhaps even hours, they shower you with compliments, constant attention, and declarations of intense love. They tell you you're perfect, their soulmate, the one they've been searching for. Grand gestures, extravagant gifts, and promises of a shared future flood your senses. It feels euphoric, intoxicating, like stepping into a fairy tale. This intense, accelerated beginning is known as love bombing, and while it mimics the passionate start of a whirlwind romance, it is often a calculated manipulation tactic designed to create rapid emotional dependency and bypass your natural defenses. It's not about genuine affection. It's about establishing control through overwhelming adoration. The purpose of love bombing is to hook you quickly and deeply. It floods your brain with dopamine, creating a powerful high associated with the manipulator. They often mirror your deepest desires, insecurities, and dreams, reflecting back an idealized version of the partner you've always longed for. This creates an illusion of profound understanding and compatibility, making you feel uniquely seen and chosen. The sheer intensity and speed of the connection overwhelm your rational judgment. Red flags are ignored or rationalized away because the emotional high is so addictive. You feel special, safe, and completely swept off your feet, lowering your boundaries far faster than you would in a healthy, gradually developing relationship. But the fairy tale phase is always temporary. Once the manipulator feels secure that you are emotionally invested and dependent, the devaluation stage begins. The constant affection abruptly stops or becomes highly inconsistent. Compliments turn into subtle criticisms. Intense attention is replaced by unexplained distance or silence. The same person who once idolized you now finds fault, dismisses your feelings, or makes you feel inadequate. You're left reeling, confused, and desperate to regain the initial adoration. What did I do wrong? You ask yourself. How can I fix this? This emotional whiplash is the core of the manipulation. You become conditioned to chase the memory of the love-bombing phase, blaming yourself for the shift in their behavior. You work harder, apologize more, and sacrifice your own needs, hoping to earn back the intense validation you once received so freely. The manipulator now controls your self-worth, doling out occasional crumbs of affection, intermittent reinforcement, just often enough to keep you hoping, but never enough to feel secure. Love bombing isn't real love. It's the creation of an emotional cage, built with bars of affection, and locked by the fear of losing the illusion they created. Recognizing this pattern is crucial to escaping before the devaluation phase completely erodes your sense of self. 12. The power of unknowing. In the game of psychological manipulation, silence can be a far more potent weapon than lies. Information withholding is a covert tactic where a person deliberately keeps critical truths, context, or updates from you, not necessarily to deceive with falsehoods, but to control your perception, limit your choices, and maintain power by keeping. You in the dark. It operates on the principle that knowledge is power. And by controlling the flow of information, the manipulator controls your reality. What you don't know becomes the invisible cage that traps you. This tactic is insidious because it often leaves no tangible evidence of wrongdoing. A partner forgets to mention a significant interaction with an ex. A boss strategically delays sharing crucial project updates, setting you up for failure. A friend conveniently omits a detail that changes the entire meaning of a story they relayed. These aren't accidental oversights. They are calculated omissions designed to shape your understanding and behavior. The manipulator isn't silent because they are forgetful. They are silent because keeping you uninformed serves their agenda. It prevents you from making informed decisions, from setting boundaries, or from recognizing their true intentions. The emotional impact of information withholding is profound. You begin to feel a gnawing sense of unease, a feeling that something is off, but you can't pinpoint why. You lack the missing pieces of the puzzle needed to trust your own judgment. When you try to seek clarity, you're often met with deflection, feigned ignorance, or even accusations. I didn't think it was important. You never ask specifically about that, or the particularly manipulative. I was just trying to protect you from getting hurt. These responses shift the blame onto you, making you feel unreasonable or paranoid for wanting the whole truth. Over time, this dynamic erodes trust at its core. You start second-guessing your intuition. You hesitate to make decisions because you fear you're missing crucial information. You may become dependent on the manipulator as the sole source of truth, accepting their carefully curated and incomplete version of reality. They become the gatekeeper of knowledge, doling out just enough information to keep you compliant, but never enough to make you truly autonomous. Information withholding creates an environment of perpetual uncertainty, a fog where your instincts are muted and your power is diminished. It's control achieved not through noise, but through the strategic absence of truth. 13. The weight of unearned guilt. There's a form of emotional control that requires no shouting, no threats, no overt aggression. It operates silently, targeting one of your most vulnerable and virtuous qualities, your conscience. This is guilt tripping, a pervasive manipulation tactic where someone intentionally makes you feel excessively guilty or responsible for their feelings or circumstances in order to control your behavior. It's the art of turning your empathy into a weapon against you, making you feel like the antagonist simply for asserting your own needs, setting boundaries, or making choices that don't revolve around them. Guilt tripping rarely involves direct accusations. Its power lies in suggestion, implication, and the strategic performance of suffering. You state a boundary, like needing a night alone, and they respond with a heavy sigh, and, okay, I guess I'll just be by myself then. Again, you decline a request you can't accommodate, and they say, it's fine. I shouldn't have expected so much after everything I've done for you. These statements aren't requests. They are emotional invoices. They don't attack you directly. They subtly position you as the source of their disappointment or hardship. The manipulator plays the martyr, leveraging your natural desire to be a good, caring person against you. This tactic hijacks your empathy. Because you care about the person and don't want to cause them pain, the implication that you have done so triggers an immediate urge to fix it, to apologize, to concede. You feel responsible for their emotional state, even when their reaction is disproportionate or their expectation was unreasonable. They twist the narrative so effectively that your perfectly healthy act of self-care or self-assertion is reframed as selfishness or betrayal. You end up apologizing for things you shouldn't feel sorry for, simply to alleviate the weight of the unearned guilt they've placed upon you. This dynamic is incredibly damaging over time. You learn to anticipate their triggers and preemptively sacrifice your own needs to avoid the inevitable guilt trip. You walk on eggshells, constantly monitoring their emotional state, feeling responsible for maintaining their happiness. Every time you give in to the guilt, you reinforce the manipulator's tactic. You teach them that all they need to do is activate your conscience, and they will get what they want. This isn't emotional honesty. It's emotional extortion. It traps you in a cycle where your kindness is used as a leash, forcing you to carry the weight of their expectations, often at the expense of your own well-being. 14. The Whiplash Romance. Imagine being pulled into an intense, magnetic connection with someone. They shower you with attention, charm, and deep validation, making you feel seen and cherished unlike ever before. This is the pull. You feel safe. You open up. You invest emotionally. Then, abruptly, without warning, they push you away. They become cold, distant, critical, or disappear altogether. You're left reeling, heart-pounding, desperately trying to understand what changed, what you did wrong. Just as you're about to break or walk away, they pull you back in with a sudden burst of warmth, an apology, or a return to the initial intensity. This dizzying, destabilizing cycle of approach and withdrawal is the push-pull technique, also known as disqualification, a powerful manipulation tactic designed to create profound emotional dependence through calculated inconsistency. The push-pull dynamic is essentially intermittent reinforcement applied to relational intimacy. It works by creating an addictive cycle of anxiety and relief. The intense pull phase floods your system with dopamine and oxytocin, creating a powerful bond and a memory of intense connection. The sudden push phase triggers anxiety, confusion, and a desperate craving to regain the lost affection. Your brain becomes fixated on solving the puzzle. How do I get back to the good part? When the manipulator eventually pulls you back, the relief is immense, far more potent than steady affection because it follows a period of distress. You become addicted not necessarily to the person, but to the cycle itself. The oscillation between emotional highs and lows. This tactic keeps you perpetually off balance and focused entirely on the manipulator's moods and behaviors. You start walking on eggshells, trying to anticipate their shifts and avoid triggering another push. Your self-esteem becomes tied to their validation. The pull moments feel like proof of their love, while the push moments feel like your failure. The manipulator rarely takes responsibility for the inconsistency. Instead, they might blame you. You're too sensitive, you expect too much, or offer vague excuses, keeping you hooked on the hope that this time, the stability will last. What makes the push-pull so insidious is how it mimics the natural ebbs and flows of early passion, making it hard to recognize as manipulation until you're deeply entangled. They might use subtle disqualifications, giving praise followed by a sharp criticism. You look great, but that color washes you out. Acting possessive one day and indifferent the next. Each push undermines your confidence, and each pull offers just enough reinforcement to keep you invested. It's emotional whiplash, intentionally orchestrated to make you doubt yourself, crave their approval, and remain trapped in a cycle where they are both the source of your pain and your perceived salvation. 15. The Thousand Papercuts. Emotional abuse isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it arrives in whispers, in casual remarks, in subtle dismissals that seem almost too small to notice, let alone confront. These are micro-invalidations, small, often indirect comments or actions that subtly undermine or deny a person's experiences, feelings, identity, or reality. They might be disguised as jokes, helpful advice, or simple observations, but their cumulative effect is profoundly damaging. Like death by 1,000 papercuts, each individual instance might seem insignificant, but repeated over time, they bleed a person's self-worth dry. You share something you're proud of, and they respond with faint praise followed by a critique. You express hurt or frustration, and they tell you, "You're being too sensitive," or "That's not what I meant." You talk about feeling tired or overwhelmed, and they one-up you with how much worse their situation is. You share a dream or ambition, and they subtly pour cold water on it. Are you sure you're cut out for that? These aren't overt attacks. They are subtle erasures. Each comment sends a quiet message. Your feelings are wrong. Your perceptions are skewed. Your reality isn't valid. Because each micro-invalidation seems minor on its own, confronting it feels like an overreaction. The manipulator often counts on this, using the subtlety as a shield. If you object, you become the problem, the one who can't take a joke, the one who is too dramatic. This dynamic forces you into silence. You start to question your own feelings before you even express them. Am I overreacting? Is this really a big deal? Maybe they're right. That self-doubt is the intended outcome. Over time, the constant drip of these subtle dismissals conditions you to invalidate yourself. You learn to shrink your emotions, minimize your experiences, and apologize for taking up space with your feelings. You stop sharing your successes to avoid having them downplayed. You stop expressing vulnerability to avoid having it dismissed. You internalize the message that your inner world is incorrect or unwelcome. Micro-invalidations don't break you with a single blow. They slowly dismantle your confidence and sense of self from the inside out. They teach you to mistrust your own reality, leaving you more dependent on the manipulator's version of events, a version where your feelings consistently don't count. 16. The counterfeit we. Humans are fundamentally tribal creatures. We are wired to trust and cooperate with those we perceive as part of our in-group. Forced teaming is a manipulative tactic that exploits this instinct by artificially creating a sense of us where none exists. The manipulator uses inclusive language, we, us, our, and implies shared goals, values, or struggles to rapidly manufacture a feeling of closeness and bypass your natural caution. It's the creation of a counterfeit partnership, designed not for mutual benefit, but to lower your guard and make you more susceptible to influence or exploitation. This tactic often appears in situations where you might feel slightly vulnerable or uncertain. A stranger offers unsolicited help and then remarks, "See, we make a good team." A salesperson trying to close a deal might say, "Let's figure out how we can make this work for you." A toxic individual caught in a lie might plead, "We just need to get through this together." That simple shift from you and I to we triggers a subconscious psychological reflex. It implies alliance, shared responsibility, and mutual understanding, even if the connection is brand new or entirely one-sided. You feel a subtle pressure to reciprocate this perceived unity, to be agreeable, to play along with the team. What makes forced teaming so insidious is how benign it can seem on the surface. It often feels like someone is just being friendly, collaborative, or supportive. But the underlying motive is strategic. By creating an instant, unearned sense of rapport, the manipulator aims to fast-track the trust-building process. If they can get you to subconsciously categorize them as part of your tribe, you are far less likely to question their motives, scrutinize their requests, or enforce your boundaries. This technique is frequently used by con artists, predators, and high-pressure salespeople because it allows them to gain access to your time, your information, your space, or your wallet much more quickly than genuine relationship building would. Much more quickly than genuine relationship building. Allow. When things inevitably go wrong, the counterfeit we serves another manipulative purpose, shared blame. Because they framed the interaction as a partnership, the manipulator can imply that you are jointly responsible for any negative outcomes, even if they were solely caused by their actions. The defense against forced teaming is to pay attention to when and why someone uses inclusive language. Is the sense of we earned through shared experience and mutual respect, or is it being declared prematurely to bypass your boundaries? Trust takes time to build. Alliances manufactured instantly with words alone are often a red flag. 17. Shrinking your reality. Imagine you express pain, anger, or fear about something someone did, and their response isn't denial, but dismissal. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. It wasn't that bad. Can't you take a joke?" This is minimization, a psychological manipulation tactic designed to invalidate your emotional experience by downplaying the significance or impact of the harmful behavior. It doesn't necessarily deny that the event occurred, but it fundamentally denies your right to feel the way you do about it. By shrinking the perceived severity of their actions, the manipulator avoids accountability and subtly shifts the focus onto your supposedly exaggerated reaction. What makes minimization so insidious is its veneer of rationality. The manipulator often frames their dismissal as offering perspective or being objective. They might sigh, roll their eyes, or adopt a tone of weary patience, implying that your emotional response is illogical or immature. This can be incredibly effective at planting seeds of self-doubt. You start questioning yourself. Am I overreacting? Was it really just a joke? Maybe I am too sensitive. This internal conflict is precisely the goal. Minimization works by eroding your trust in your own emotional compass. Over time, repeated minimization trains you to suppress your feelings. You learn that expressing hurt will likely be met with dismissal or even ridicule. So you start keeping it inside. You downplay your own pain, telling yourself and others it's fine, even when it's not. You soften your language, hedge your statements, and apologize for having emotions, all in an effort to avoid triggering another invalidating response. This silence becomes a form of self-betrayal, reinforcing the manipulator's narrative that your feelings aren't valid or important. Minimization is a hallmark of abusive dynamics. It allows the abuser to maintain control while appearing reasonable. They shift the blame for the conflict from their action to your reaction. Suddenly, the problem isn't that they broke a promise, crossed a boundary, or said something cruel. The problem is that you got upset about it. This tactic creates profound emotional isolation. When the person hurting you is also the person telling you your hurt isn't real, you begin to feel crazy, alone, and fundamentally misunderstood. Recognizing minimization means holding on to the validity of your feelings, even when someone is actively trying to convince you they don't matter. Your emotional reality is real, even if they refuse to acknowledge it. 18. Selling you tomorrow. Imagine someone paints a vivid, beautiful picture of your future together. They talk about moving in, getting married, traveling the world, or achieving incredible success side by side. These promises feel real, exciting, and deeply validating. You become emotionally invested in this shared dream, willing to overlook present inconsistencies or sacrifices because the future looks so bright. This is future faking, a manipulative tactic where someone uses grand promises about tomorrow to secure your compliance, loyalty, or resources today, with little or no intention of ever making that future a reality. It's the strategic weaponization of hope. This tactic often appears early in relationships or commitments during the honeymoon phase. The manipulator identifies your deepest desires for love, security, success, family, and crafts a narrative where they are the key to fulfilling them. Someday, we'll have everything we've ever wanted. Once things settle down, we'll finally focus on us. You're on track for amazing things here. These statements are designed to hook your emotional investment, making you feel secure and committed based purely on potential, not present reality. You fall in love not necessarily with the person they are, but with the fantasy of who they promise to become. What makes future faking so effective is that it allows the manipulator to avoid accountability in the present. They don't need to show up consistently, treat you well now, or make concrete efforts, because they've successfully shifted your focus to the horizon. You tolerate bad behavior, ignore red flags, and put your own needs on hold, telling yourself it's temporary, that it will all be worth it when the promised future arrives, but that future consistently gets postponed. There's always a new excuse, another obstacle, a reason why now isn't the right time. Each time you start to doubt or pull away, they sense it and refresh the fantasy, dangling just enough hope to keep you invested. Admitting that the future they sold you was a lie is incredibly painful. It means acknowledging that your hope was misplaced, your investment was wasted, and your trust was exploited. So, many people choose to keep believing, clinging to the illusion, rather than facing the difficult truth. Future faking doesn't just steal your time and energy. It steals your present moment, trapping you in a perpetual state of waiting for a tomorrow that the manipulator never planned to deliver. 19. The Deafening Silence. In the arsenal of psychological manipulation, few tactics are as quietly devastating as the silent treatment. It is the deliberate and complete withdrawal of communication, acknowledgement, and emotional connection, used not as a healthy pause for reflection, but as a form of punishment and control. This isn't just someone needing space. It's an active, hostile act designed to make you feel invisible, anxious, guilty, and desperate for resolution. The silence itself becomes a deafening weapon, communicating rejection and disapproval far more powerfully than angry words ever could. When someone subjects you to the silent treatment, often after a disagreement or a perceived slight, they effectively erase you from their reality. No eye contact, no responses to texts or calls, perhaps even physically ignoring your presence. This abrupt severing of connection triggers primal anxiety. Humans are social creatures wired for belonging. Being ignored or ostracized feels like a threat to our very survival. Your brain goes into overdrive, desperately trying to understand what you did wrong and how to fix it. You replay conversations, analyze your behavior, and often conclude that you must be the problem, even if the manipulator was the one who initiated the conflict. The power of the silent treatment lies in its ambiguity and the intense psychological distress it creates. Because the manipulator refuses to communicate, you are left guessing at their motives and how to appease them. This uncertainty is torture. You feel powerless, anxious, and consumed by the need to break the silence. You might find yourself apologizing profusely, even when you're not sure what you're apologizing for, just to re-establish connection and end the emotional torment. This dynamic allows the manipulator to assert complete dominance without saying a word. They control the initiation, duration, and termination of the punishment. When they finally do decide to speak to you again, the relief you feel is immense, almost euphoric. You're so grateful for the cessation of pain that you rarely challenge the tactic itself. Instead, you learn the implicit lesson. Avoid conflict, suppress your needs, and comply with their unspoken rules to prevent being frozen out again. The silent treatment doesn't resolve issues. It trains you to fear them. It's not a communication breakdown. It's a calculated strategy to break your will through the sheer weight of unbearable silence. 20. The Saint's Shield. Have you ever noticed how sometimes, right after doing something virtuous, donating to charity, helping a friend, sticking to a diet, you feel a subtle urge to indulge in something less virtuous? This common psychological quirk, where past good deeds give us unconscious permission to misbehave later, is called moral licensing. While often harmless in everyday life, this cognitive bias can become a powerful manipulative weapon. Moral licensing exploitation occurs when a manipulator strategically uses their past acts of kindness, generosity, or perceived morality as a shield to justify or excuse their present harmful behavior. It's the ultimate emotional bait and switch, using their goodness to silence your legitimate complaints. The manipulator builds up a bank of moral credits through displays of virtue. They might be incredibly supportive during a crisis, make significant sacrifices for you, or cultivate a public image of being kind, ethical, or generous. This establishes them in your mind, and potentially in the minds of others, as fundamentally good. Then, when they behave badly, lie, cheat, manipulate, betray, and you attempt to hold them accountable, they deploy the shield. How can you accuse me of that after everything I've done for you? I made one mistake, and suddenly I'm the villain. You know I'm a good person deep down. This tactic is incredibly effective because it triggers cognitive dissonance and guilt in the target. You are faced with conflicting information. The memory of their past goodness clashes with the reality of their present harm. It feels easier and more comfortable to trust the established pattern of goodness and dismiss the current transgression as an anomaly. You feel guilty for questioning someone who has done so much for you. You start minimizing your own hurt, telling yourself they didn't mean it, or nobody's perfect. You hesitate to enforce boundaries because doing so feels like betraying the good person you thought you knew. The manipulator counts on this hesitation. They use their past actions not as a standard to live up to, but as a get-out-of-jail-free card. They don't need to apologize or change. They just need to remind you of their previous saintly behavior. This allows them to avoid accountability indefinitely. In public spheres, leaders or organizations might point to past philanthropic work or ethical statements to deflect criticism of current exploitative practices. The key to dismantling this manipulation is to understand a fundamental truth. Past good deeds do not excuse present harm. Accountability exists in the now. Someone's history doesn't give them a license to hurt you, no matter how brightly their halo once shone. 21. The poison triangle. In the intricate web of human relationships, trust often flows along predictable paths. Social psychology tells us about triadic closure. If you trust person B, and person B trusts person C, you are naturally inclined to extend trust to person C, even if you don't know them well. This principle helps build communities and networks. However, in the hands of a manipulator, this natural tendency becomes a weapon. Triadic closure manipulation involves strategically creating or exploiting these three-person dynamics to control information, isolate individuals, and maintain power by turning potential allies against each other. The manipulator positions themselves as the central node, the indispensable connector, while secretly poisoning the links between the other 2 points of the triangle. It often begins under the guise of helpfulness or social connection. The manipulator might introduce you to a mutual friend or colleague, saying things like, "You two would really get along," or "Let me connect you with someone who understands." They present themselves as the bridge, fostering a sense of shared community. However, behind the scenes, they are carefully curating the narrative. They might subtly feed person C negative, and often distorted, information about you, while simultaneously telling you biased stories about person C. They plant seeds of doubt, misrepresent conversations, or highlight minor flaws, ensuring that a truly authentic, trusting connection between you and person C can never fully form independently. The manipulator remains the central hub through which information and misinformation flows. This gives them immense power. If you start to question the manipulator's behavior, they can leverage the poisoned triangle against you. They might claim, "Well, person C agrees with me," or "Person C also noticed you've been acting strangely." Suddenly, you feel outnumbered and isolated. Your own judgment seems unreliable because this other person, whom you were inclined to trust, thanks to triadic closure, appears to validate the manipulator's perspective. You begin to doubt yourself, wondering if you are the problem. This tactic is incredibly effective at silencing dissent and maintaining control, especially within friend groups, families, or workplaces. The victim feels ganged up on, paranoid, and confused, unable to trust their own perceptions because the social environment seems to confirm the manipulator's reality. Triadic closure manipulation turns the natural human desire for connection into a tool of isolation. It ensures that the manipulator is always the most trusted person in the room by subtly undermining the trust between everyone else. Recognizing this pattern means understanding that alliances built through a manipulator are often traps designed to keep you contained. 22. The borrowed shine. First impressions are powerful, and sometimes a single outstanding quality can cast a radiant glow that obscures everything else. The halo effect is our natural cognitive bias to assume that someone who is good at one thing, like being attractive, charismatic, or successful, must be good at everything else. Halo effect exploitation is the manipulative tactic where an individual intentionally leverages this bias, using one prominent positive trait as a dazzling shield to hide significant flaws, red flags, or harmful intentions. They don't need to be genuinely good. They just need to shine brightly in one area, knowing our minds will often fill in the rest with unearned admiration. The manipulator identifies their strongest asset, perhaps its exceptional charm, physical attractiveness, impressive intelligence, apparent generosity, or professional success, and puts it on constant display. This single, highly visible positive trait becomes their defining characteristic in the eyes of others. When this halo is firmly in place, it becomes incredibly difficult for people to see or accept contradictory information. Our brains crave consistency. It's uncomfortable to hold the conflicting ideas that someone can be both incredibly charming and deeply cruel, or highly successful and ethically bankrupt. So, we tend to dismiss the negative evidence to maintain the coherent, positive image created by the halo. This allows the manipulator to operate with a kind of social camouflage. They might be publicly lauded for their charisma while being emotionally abusive in private. They might donate generously to charity while exploiting their employees behind closed doors. Their polished exterior makes it difficult for victims to speak out or be believed. When concerns are raised, observers influenced by the halo effect are quick to defend the manipulator. But they seem so nice, or someone that's successful wouldn't do something like that. The victim's reality is invalidated not just by the manipulator, but by the very positive image the manipulator has so carefully crafted. Excuses are readily made for their bad behavior. They're just stressed. They didn't mean it. That's just how they are. The halo effect encourages others, and sometimes the victim themselves, to rationalize or minimize the harm, attributing it to external factors rather than inherent character flaws. That to protect yourself, you must learn to compartmentalize your judgments. Acknowledge and appreciate someone's positive qualities, but do not let that single trait blind you to evidence in other areas. Evaluate actions and character independently, recognizing that charisma does not equal kindness, success does not equal integrity, and a shining halo can often hide the deepest shadows. 23. The boiling frog. Imagine a frog placed in a pot of lukewarm water. It sits comfortably. Now, imagine the heat is turned up, but only by a single degree every few minutes. The change is so gradual, so incremental, that the frog doesn't perceive the danger. It keeps adjusting to the rising temperature until it's too late, eventually boiling without ever attempting to jump out. This grim metaphor illustrates the terrifying effectiveness of desensitization by gradual exposure, a manipulation tactic that conditions you to accept increasingly harmful or unacceptable behavior by introducing it in small, almost imperceptible steps. It's the slow, methodical erosion of your boundaries and your sense of normalcy until you find yourself tolerating situations that would have once horrified you. This tactic rarely begins with overt abuse. It starts with something small that pushes your comfort zone just slightly. A backhanded compliment, a sarcastic joke that stings a little, a promise broken with a plausible excuse, a minor invasion of your privacy. You feel a prickle of unease, but it seems too minor to make a fuss about. Confronting it might feel like an overreaction. Perhaps they apologize, or maybe they gaslight you. You're too sensitive, so you let it slide. But that moment sets a new precedent. Your baseline for acceptable behavior has been subtly lowered. The next transgression is a tiny bit worse, but because it's only slightly worse than the previous one, it also feels manageable, almost familiar. This pattern repeats. The violations escalate so gradually that your nervous system doesn't register a sudden shock. Instead, it adapts. You get used to the tension, the subtle disrespect, the feeling of walking on eggshells. Your internal alarm system, which initially screamed danger, starts to quiet down. You normalize the discomfort, telling yourself, it's not that bad. That's just how they are, or I'm strong enough to handle this. The manipulator relies on this gradual adaptation. If they had revealed their full capacity for cruelty or control on day one, you would likely have run. But by slowly increasing the intensity, they effectively boil the frog, reprogramming your standards without your conscious awareness. This is common in abusive relationships, cult indoctrination, and even toxic work environments where initial enthusiasm slowly gives way to burnout and acceptance of unreasonable demands. Recognizing this pattern requires vigilance about those initial small boundary violations. They are often test balloons, sent up to see how much you will tolerate. Enforcing boundaries early and consistently, even when it feels uncomfortable, is crucial to preventing the slow descent into normalization. 24. The stolen reflection. Imagine finally finding the courage to share something deeply personal and vulnerable. A childhood trauma, a painful insecurity, a secret fear. As you speak, the person listening looks at you with profound understanding, nods intently, and then shares a story from their own past that sounds remarkably, almost eerily, similar. "That's incredible," they might say. "I went through the exact same thing." In that moment, a powerful sense of connection floods you. You feel seen, validated, and profoundly understood, perhaps for the first time. This intense, accelerated intimacy is the goal of mirroring vulnerabilities, a deeply manipulative tactic where someone feigns shared experiences and emotional scars, not to build genuine empathy, but to rapidly gain your trust and exploit your trust. Openness. This technique is far more insidious than simple active listening or finding common ground. The manipulator isn't just relating to you. They are actively constructing a persona based on your pain. They carefully study your disclosures, your language, your emotional tone, the specific details of your story, and then reflect them back to you, often with just enough variation to seem authentic. They become a perfect echo of your inner world. This mirroring bypasses the slow, natural process of building trust. It creates an instant, powerful bond based on the illusion of shared suffering. You feel safe, you drop your guard, and you begin to reveal even more, believing you found a kindred spirit. But the vulnerability they display is often a performance. Their stories might be exaggerated, borrowed, or outright fabricated, designed solely to trigger your empathy and encourage reciprocity. While you are bearing your soul, they are gathering intelligence. Every fear you confess, every insecurity you reveal, becomes a potential weapon they can use against you later. Once they feel they have secured your trust and emotional investment, the mask often begins to slip. The same person who seemed to understand your deepest wounds might suddenly use them to guilt-trip you, criticize you, or dismiss your feelings. "You're letting your past control you," they might say, using the very information you shared in confidence. This betrayal is profoundly damaging because it strikes at the core of your vulnerability. You feel foolish, exposed, and deeply confused. How could someone who seemed to understand you so intimately turn on you? The truth is, they never understood you. They studied you. They used your pain as a key to unlock your trust. Mirroring vulnerabilities isn't about shared healing. It's emotional espionage, leaving the victim feeling not only hurt by the present manipulation, but also tainted by the counterfeit connection they thought was real. 25. The anchor of shame. Shame is one of the most powerful and paralyzing human emotions. While it can sometimes serve a social function, in the hands of a manipulator, it becomes a devastating tool. Shame anchoring is a psychological tactic where a person intentionally links intense feelings of shame, humiliation, or inadequacy to a specific part of your personality, your desires, your ambitions, or your self-expression. This link, or anchor, is often forged through a single, cutting remark or dismissive gesture delivered at a moment of vulnerability. Once the anchor is set, the manipulator doesn't need to actively shame you anymore. The mere thought of repeating the behavior or expressing that part of yourself triggers the anchored feeling, effectively silencing you from the inside out. Imagine you share a creative project you're passionate about, and instead of encouragement, you're met with a smirk and a comment like, "Oh, that's cute. A bit childish though, don't you think?" You think? Or perhaps you express a need for emotional support, and they roll their eyes and say, "Are you always this needy?" Or you celebrate a small success, and they immediately point out a flaw, or compare you unfavorably to someone else. These moments might be disguised as honesty, teasing, or even constructive criticism, but their impact is surgical. They target something personal and vulnerable, and inject it with shame. In that moment, you feel the hot flush of embarrassment, the sinking feeling in your stomach. You might quickly change the subject, laugh it off, or even apologize. But the anchor has been dropped. Later, when you consider pursuing that passion again, or expressing that need, or celebrating another success, the memory of that shame resurfaces, often unconsciously. A voice whispers, "Don't. Remember how stupid you felt. Remember how they reacted." And so, you hesitate. You self-censor. You play smaller. The manipulator doesn't need to be present. The anchor they install does the work, pulling you back from expressing your authentic self. Shame anchoring is particularly insidious because it often targets the very things that make you unique or bring you joy. It conditions you to associate pain with authenticity. Over time, repeated shame anchoring can lead to a profound loss of self-esteem and a fear of judgment that permeates all areas of your life. You learn to hide parts of yourself, not because they are inherently wrong, but because someone weaponized shame to make them feel that way. Breaking free requires recognizing the anchor for what it is, an external manipulation, not an internal truth, and consciously choosing to reclaim the parts of yourself that were unjustly shamed. 26. The edited past. Memory is notoriously unreliable, but selective memory manipulation isn't about innocent forgetfulness. It's about the deliberate, strategic curation of the past to serve a present agenda. This tactic involves intentionally highlighting, exaggerating, or fabricating memories that paint the manipulator in a positive light or support their current argument, while conveniently omitting, downplaying, or denying memories that would assign them blame or contradict their narrative. It's a form of gaslighting that doesn't necessarily invent wholesale lies, but instead edits reality by cherry-picking convenient truths and discarding inconvenient ones, leaving you questioning your own sanity. The manipulator becomes a masterful editor of shared history. They vividly recall every favor they ever did for you, but have complete amnesia regarding the sacrifices you made for them. They remember the one time you raised your voice in frustration, but conveniently forget the weeks of passive aggression or boundary violations that provoked it. They cling fiercely to a minor mistake you made years ago, but dismiss their own repeated betrayals as in the past. They present these fragmented, biased recollections not as opinions, but as objective facts, often stating with unwavering confidence, "That's not how it happened," or "You're remembering it wrong." This tactic is incredibly effective because it attacks the very foundation of your reality, your memory. When someone confidently contradicts your recollection of an event, especially someone you trust or care about, it plants seeds of doubt. Did I remember that correctly? Am I exaggerating? Maybe they're right. You find yourself replaying events, searching for confirmation, feeling increasingly unsure. This confusion is the manipulator's goal. By destabilizing your trust in your own memory, they make you more reliant on their version of the past. In arguments, selective memory becomes a powerful weapon. By controlling the official record of events, the manipulator can consistently frame themselves as the victim or the reasonable party, while painting you as irrational, forgetful, or overly sensitive. Every attempt you make to present the full picture is met with dismissal or further distortion. Over time, this constant battle over the past is exhausting. You may start to avoid bringing up issues altogether, knowing your memory will be questioned or invalidated. You learn to accept their edited reality simply to keep the peace. Selective memory manipulation doesn't just change the past, it controls the present by making you doubt the very experiences that shaped you. 27. The unpredictable jackpot. Imagine playing a slot machine that pays out randomly. Sometimes you win big, sometimes small, sometimes nothing at all for long stretches. It's this very unpredictability that keeps you glued to the machine, pulling the lever again and again, convinced the next big win is just around the corner. Now, apply that same principle to human affection and validation. This is the unpredictable reward system, a potent form of manipulation closely related to intermittent reinforcement. It involves delivering positive reinforcement, like praise, attention, affection, or gifts, inconsistent and randomly, creating a powerful addictive cycle that keeps the target emotionally hooked, confused, and desperately chasing the next jackpot. The manipulation often starts with a period of intense, consistent reward, similar to love bombing. The manipulator showers you with positive attention, making you feel valued and secure. This establishes a baseline of expectation. Then, the rewards start becoming unpredictable. Affection is suddenly withdrawn without explanation. Compliments cease. Communication becomes sporadic. You feel anxious and confused, wondering what you did wrong. Just as you start to despair, they offer another burst of positive attention. A kind word, a thoughtful gesture, a moment of intense connection. The relief you feel is immense, flooding your brain with dopamine. This hit is often more powerful than the initial, consistent affection because it comes after a period of deprivation and uncertainty. This cycle turns the relationship into an emotional slot machine. You become addicted not necessarily to the person, but to the unpredictable highs and the desperate hope of hitting the jackpot again. Your behavior becomes focused on trying to figure out the winning formula. You analyze their moods, modify your actions, suppress your needs, and walk on eggshells, constantly trying to replicate the conditions that led to the last reward. The manipulator maintains control precisely because the rewards are inconsistent. If they were always cruel, you would leave. If they were always kind, you might become complacent. But the unpredictability keeps you perpetually engaged, anxious, and striving for their approval. This dynamic makes it incredibly difficult to break free. You become conditioned to tolerate the lows because the intermittent highs feel so euphoric. You blame yourself for their withdrawal and feel intense gratitude when they offer even the smallest crumb of affection. You forget what stable, consistent positive regard feels like, accepting the emotional roller coaster as normal. The unpredictable reward system doesn't build trust, it builds obsession, trapping you in a cycle where you're always gambling for the love that was freely given only at the start. 28. The Invisible Rulebook. Imagine navigating a social interaction where you constantly feel like you're breaking rules you didn't know existed. You do something seemingly innocuous, fail to anticipate someone's need, express an opinion they don't share, respond to a text too slowly, and suddenly you're met with coldness, passive aggression, or accusations of being thoughtless or disrespectful. You're left scrambling, apologizing, trying to figure out what unwritten law you violate. This confusing and anxiety-provoking experience is often the result of phantom norms, unspoken, often arbitrary, rules and expectations that a manipulator invents and enforces as if they were universal truths or basic common sense, punishing you for violations you couldn't possibly have anticipated. Phantom norms are a tool for control disguised as social etiquette or moral standards. The manipulator uses phrases that imply a shared understanding that doesn't actually exist. Everyone knows you're supposed to call after a certain time. It's just basic respect to offer X. I shouldn't have to explain why that's inappropriate. These statements serve to frame their personal, often unreasonable, expectation as an objective standard that you have somehow failed to meet. When you inevitably transgress one of these invisible rules, they react with disappointment, hurt, or indignation, making you feel deficient, socially inept, or morally flawed. This tactic creates a state of perpetual anxiety and hypervigilance. You start walking on eggshells, constantly trying to guess the manipulator's expectations and anticipate their potential reactions. You second-guess your actions, overthink your words, and lose spontaneity, terrified of unknowingly breaking another rule from their invisible handbook. This constant self-monitoring is exhausting and erodes your confidence. You begin to internalize the belief that you are somehow deficient, that you lack common sense, or that you're inherently inconsiderate, because you keep finding yourself on the receiving end of their disapproval. What makes phantom norms so effective is their deniability. Because the rules were never explicitly stated, the manipulator can always claim you misunderstood or that the expectation should have been obvious. They avoid direct confrontation while maintaining complete control over the social or relational dynamic. They get to define the terms of engagement without ever having to negotiate them. Recognizing phantom norms means trusting your own sense of what is reasonable and fair. If someone consistently punishes you for breaking rules you were never taught, the problem isn't your lack of understanding, it's their manipulative game. 29. The echo trap. Imagine meeting someone who seems to finish your sentences, share your deepest fears, and articulate your most cherished dreams with uncanny precision. They echo your values, mirror your frustrations, and validate your unique perspective on the world. You feel an instant, profound connection, a sense of being truly seen and understood. Perhaps for the first time. This exhilarating feeling of perfect alignment is the bait in the echoic agreement trap. It's a manipulative tactic where someone doesn't just listen to you. They become a near-perfect reflection of you, mirroring your thoughts and feelings, not out of genuine empathy, but as a calculated strategy to rapidly gain your trust and lower your defenses. The manipulator employing this tactic is like a chameleon, adapting their persona to match yours. They listen intently when you share something vulnerable or passionate, not necessarily to understand you, but to gather data. They memorize your key phrases, your core beliefs, your emotional triggers. Then they skillfully reflect this information back to you, often framed as their own deeply held convictions or uncannily similar experiences. That's exactly how I feel. I've always believed that too. It's like you're reading my mind. This creates a powerful illusion of resonance. Your brain, wired to trust those who seem similar to us, interprets this echo as a sign of safety, compatibility, and trustworthiness. You find yourself opening up more quickly, sharing secrets, and investing emotionally far faster than you normally would. This accelerated intimacy is precisely the goal. Once the manipulator feels they have established this deep, albeit false, bond, the subtle shift begins. The perfect agreement starts to fray at the edges. They might gently question a belief they previously shared, subtly steer you towards a different perspective, or express disappointment when you don't conform to an expectation they never explicitly stated, but implied through their mirroring. Because you are already operating under the assumption of shared understanding, you are likely to blame yourself for the disconnect. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I need to adjust my thinking. You start conforming, trying to get back to that initial state of perfect harmony, not realizing that harmony was a performance. The echoic agreement trap doesn't force compliance. It seduces it. It gets you to willingly hand over your trust, and eventually, parts of your own perspective, because you believe you're aligning with someone who is fundamentally like you. It's a form of manipulation that feels like connection, turning your desire to be understood into the very mechanism that makes you vulnerable. 30. The Mirage of Scarcity. Imagine wandering through a desert, parched and desperate, when you see a shimmering oasis on the horizon. You quicken your pace, driven by the urgent need for the life-saving water it promises. This intense focus, born from perceived scarcity, is exactly what the false scarcity illusion aims to create in your emotional or professional life. It is a manipulation tactic, where someone artificially manufactures the impression that their affection, Attention, approval, or a specific opportunity is incredibly rare, highly sought after, and perpetually at risk of disappearing. This triggers your fear of loss and insecurity, pressuring you to act fast, compete fiercely, and accept less than you deserve, all in pursuit of a mirage. The manipulator employing this tactic subtly, or not so subtly, implies that what they offer is exceptionally valuable, and that you are lucky to even be considered. In relationships, they might hint at other admirers, constantly mention attractive friends, or remind you how many people would love to be in your position. You know, anyone would be lucky to have me. In a work context, a boss might emphasize how competitive the job market is, or how many other candidates wanted your role, implying you should be grateful for whatever you get. The underlying message is always the same. What I have is scarce, you are replaceable, and you need to work hard to keep your spot. This manufactured scarcity hijacks your survival instincts. It activates your fear of missing out, FOMO, and preys on insecurities about your own worth. You start believing that you must secure this relationship or opportunity immediately, before someone else snaps it up. This sense of urgency short-circuits your rational thinking. You become less likely to notice red flags, negotiate terms, or enforce boundaries because you're operating from a place of fear. The fear of losing this supposedly rare and precious thing. You might find yourself overgiving, tolerating disrespect, or accepting unfair conditions, all because you've bought into the illusion that this is your only chance. The cruel irony is that the scarcity is often entirely fabricated. The manipulator might not have other options lined up. They simply know that making you believe they do gives them immense power. They create a competitive dynamic where none exists, forcing you to constantly prove your value. The oasis they offer is often just a reflection of your own desires, made to seem exclusive. Recognizing this tactic requires stepping back from the manufactured urgency and assessing the situation objectively. Is this opportunity or person genuinely rare and valuable, or are you being pressured by an artificially created fear of loss? True value doesn't need to create panic. False scarcity thrives on it. 31. The shield of ignorance. Imagine trying to resolve a conflict with someone who consistently responds with a blank stare, a confused shrug, or a simple wait. I don't understand what you're talking about. You explain yourself clearly. You state your boundaries, you recall specific events, but they meet your clarity with fog. This isn't genuine confusion. It's often a calculated manipulation known as tactical ignorance. It is the deliberate act of feigning ignorance, misunderstanding, or forgetfulness to avoid responsibility, derail confrontation, shift emotional labor, and maintain control. It weaponizes the phrase "I didn't know," turning supposed cluelessness into an impenetrable shield. This tactic is incredibly effective because it's passive, deniable, and deeply frustrating for the target. The manipulator doesn't need to lie aggressively. They simply refuse to acknowledge or engage with the truth. They forget promises they made. They misunderstand boundaries you've clearly communicated multiple times. They don't realize their actions were hurtful, even when the impact is obvious. They conveniently fail to notice problems that require their input or effort. This strategic performance of incompetence forces you into the role of the over-explainer, the nag, the one who is making things complicated. The goal of tactical ignorance isn't to reach understanding. It's to exhaust you into silence. Every time you have to re-explain, re-clarify, or restate your feelings, your emotional energy is depleted. Your frustration mounts, making you appear unreasonable or overly emotional, which further validates the manipulator's feigned confusion. They remain calm and seemingly bewildered, while you become increasingly agitated. This dynamic cleverly flips the script. Your reaction to their deliberate obtuseness becomes the real problem, not their initial behavior. They avoid accountability simply by refusing to participate in reality. This manipulation thrives in power imbalances, relationships, workplaces, families. A partner might repeatedly forget to do their share of chores, forcing the other partner to pick up the slack. A boss might claim ignorance about a problem they were clearly informed about, shifting the blame onto their subordinate. Over time, tactical ignorance conditions you to lower your expectations. You stop asking for clarity. You stop trying to hold them accountable. You start doing things yourself because it's easier than battling the fog. You learn that their ignorance is a wall you cannot penetrate, and that silence or capitulation is the only path to temporary peace. But it's a peace bought at the cost of your own reality and needs. 32. Drowning in static. Imagine trying to have a serious conversation, but instead of a dialogue, you're hit with a verbal tsunami. A torrent of accusations, justifications, irrelevant details, shifting topics, and intense emotion washes over you so quickly and forcefully that you can't process any of it. Your mind goes blank. Your body freezes, and your only instinct is to escape the overwhelming noise. This is flooding, also known as the overwhelm tactic. It's a psychological manipulation strategy designed to intentionally overload your cognitive and emotional processing capabilities, shutting down your ability to think critically, assert yourself, or resist compliance. The goal isn't to win the argument, it's to drown your resistance in manufactured chaos. Flooding works by exploiting the limits of our cognitive load. Our brains can only handle so much information and emotional intensity at once. When bombarded with excessive stimuli, rapid-fire questions, dramatic emotional outbursts, stacked demands, contradictory information, our prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thought, effectively shuts down. We enter a state of fight, flight, or most commonly in these scenarios, freeze. We become mentally paralyzed, unable to formulate coherent thoughts or responses. This state of overwhelm is precisely what the manipulator aims to achieve. In this vulnerable state, our primary drive becomes escaping the overwhelming stimulus. We become highly suggestible and prone to making concessions we wouldn't normally agree to, simply to end the onslaught. An abuser might use flooding during an argument, yelling, crying, bringing up past grievances, and making rapid-fire accusations until you break down and apologize just to restore peace. A high-pressure salesperson might overwhelm you with technical jargon, limited time offers, and complex financing options until you sign the contract just to escape the pressure. Even love bombing can be a form of flooding, overwhelming you with intense affection and future promises so quickly that you don't have time to notice red flags. Over time, repeated exposure to flooding creates a powerful conditioning effect. You learn to associate certain topics, situations, or even the manipulator's presence with the feeling of being overwhelmed. You start walking on eggshells, avoiding confrontation, and suppressing your own needs to prevent triggering another flood. You self-censor, not because you agree, but because you fear the emotional drowning. What appears to outsiders as mere intensity or passion is experienced by the target as psychological warfare. Flooding isn't a loss of control by the manipulator. It is the control, achieved by deliberately pushing you past your cognitive limits, until submission feels like the only path back to calm. 33. The provoked confession. Imagine someone subtly pokes at one of your known insecurities, or makes a vague, passive-aggressive comment designed to elicit a response. "Must be nice to be so relaxed all the time," they might say, implying you're lazy. Or, "Some people just aren't team players," aimed squarely at you after a minor disagreement. You feel the sting, the unfairness, the urge to defend yourself. That urge is the bait. The moment you take it, by reacting emotionally, explaining yourself, getting defensive, or even just stating your feelings honestly, the trap springs. But this is bait and blame, a manipulative tactic where someone intentionally provokes you into a negative reaction, and then uses that reaction as evidence that you are the problem, effectively flipping the script and avoiding accountability for their own provocation. The manipulator employing this tactic isn't interested in resolution. They're interested in control and deflection. They carefully choose bait that targets your specific vulnerabilities or triggers. When you inevitably react, they feign innocence or victimhood. Wow, I was just trying to talk, and you blew up. See? This is exactly what I mean about you being too sensitive. Now look who's getting aggressive. Suddenly, the focus shifts entirely away from their initial provocative behavior and onto your overreaction. They position themselves as the calm, reasonable one, while you are cast as unstable, irrational, or aggressive. This creates a maddening no-win scenario. If you don't react to the bait, their comment hangs in the air, leaving you feeling silently undermined. If you do react, your reaction becomes the weapon used against you. You find yourself apologizing for your tone, your frustration, or for simply having feelings, while the manipulator successfully evades any responsibility for their role in creating the conflict. This dynamic is incredibly effective at shutting down communication and enforcing compliance. Over time, bait and blame conditions you to fear your own reactions. You learn that expressing anger, hurt, or even disagreement will likely be twisted and used against you. You start walking on eggshells, carefully monitoring your words and emotions, trying desperately not to take the bait. You self-censor, suppress your feelings, and avoid confrontation, not because the issues are resolved, but because the cost of reacting feels too high. This silence and emotional suppression are precisely what the manipulator wants. Bait and blame isn't just about winning an argument. It's about training you to stop fighting back altogether, ensuring their provocations go unchallenged. 34. The fog machine. Imagine trying to navigate a familiar room, but someone keeps rearranging the furniture, flickering the lights, and whispering contradictory directions from the shadows. You bump into things, lose your bearings, and start to doubt your own sense of direction. This disorientation is the goal of controlled confusion, a psychological manipulation tactic where a person intentionally creates ambiguity, chaos, mixed messages, and contradictions to destabilize your sense of reality, erode your confidence, make you dependent on them for clarity. It's not accidental miscommunication. It's the strategic deployment of mental fog to keep you lost and easier to lead. The manipulator using this tactic might tell you one thing today and deny it tomorrow. They might give vague instructions and then criticize you for not understanding. They might switch rapidly between affection and criticism, leaving you constantly guessing where you stand. They answer direct questions with riddles, non sequiturs, or by changing the subject entirely. They rewrite shared history, contradict themselves within the same conversation, and then act bewildered when you point it out. The common thread is a persistent lack of clarity, a refusal to provide stable ground. This tactic exploits the human brain's fundamental need for coherence and consistency. When faced with information that doesn't make sense or constantly shifts, our minds desperately try to resolve the contradiction. We often turn inward first, assuming the problem lies with us. Did I misunderstand? Am I forgetting something? Maybe I'm being too sensitive. This self-doubt is the manipulator's entry point. As your own judgment becomes clouded by the fog they've created, you start looking to them, the source of the confusion, for answers and stability. The realm and source of the confusion, stability. They become the only fixed point in the chaos, even though they engineered it. Controlled confusion is a powerful tool for maintaining dominance without resorting to overt aggression. Abusers use it to keep partners questioning reality. Cult leaders use it to break down recruits' critical thinking. Toxic bosses might use it to keep employees insecure and compliant. By overloading your cognitive processing with contradictions and ambiguity, they exhaust your mental defenses. You eventually stop trying to make sense of things, stop questioning, and start agreeing simply to end the mental chaos. You become reliant on their interpretation of events, because trusting your own perception feels too confusing and destabilizing. Controlled confusion doesn't just obscure the truth, it makes you forget how to find it on your own. 35. Erasing you. Abuse isn't always about controlling what you do. Sometimes, it's about controlling who you are. Identity undermining is a deeply insidious form of psychological manipulation aimed at systematically dismantling a person's sense of self, their personality, passions, beliefs, and confidence, until they become dependent on the manipulator for validation and direction. It's not a sudden attack, but a slow, methodical erosion, achieved through a constant barrage of subtle criticisms, negative labels, and dismissals disguised as feedback, jokes, or even concern. The goal isn't just to hurt you, it's to erase the parts of you that are independent of their influence. It often begins with small, targeted comments that seem almost harmless in isolation. You laugh too loud. Are you sure you want to wear that? You always take things too personally. That hobby is a bit childish, don't you think? These remarks aren't presented as attacks, but as observations, often delivered with a tone of supposed helpfulness. However, they are strategically aimed at aspects of your personality, appearance, interests, or ambitions that give you a sense of individuality and joy. When repeated consistently over time, these small cuts begin to accumulate. You start to internalize the criticisms. You question your laugh, your style, your sensitivity, your passions. You begin to self-censor, holding back the parts of yourself that have been labeled too much, not enough, wrong, or embarrassing. You hesitate before speaking your mind, pursuing a goal, or even expressing enthusiasm, fearing judgment or dismissal. This self-editing isn't a conscious choice. It's a conditioned response to the slow poisoning of your self-perception. The manipulator is essentially training you to shrink, to take up less space, to become a version of yourself that is more palatable and less threatening to their control. What makes identity undermining so devastating is that it makes you complicit in your own erasure. As your confidence dwindles, you become more reliant on the manipulator for approval. Their opinion becomes the measure of your worth. You might start asking for their permission, directly or indirectly, to be yourself. When you try to reclaim a part of your old identity, they often push back, perhaps saying, "You've changed," or "This isn't the person I know," further reinforcing the idea that your authentic self is unacceptable. Identity undermining doesn't just damage your self-esteem. It aims to rewrite your very sense of who you are, leaving you feeling lost, dependent, and disconnected from the core of your being. 36. The tyranny of tears. In conflicts, accountability requires facing difficult truths. But what if someone could consistently evade responsibility simply by claiming victimhood? This is the essence of victim playing, a manipulative tactic where an individual exaggerates, fabricates, or strategically displays suffering not out of genuine pain, but as a calculated means to gain sympathy, deflect blame, control others' behavior, and shut down confrontation. It's the weaponization of perceived weakness, hijacking the natural human instinct to protect and comfort those who appear vulnerable, turning your empathy into their shield. The performance of victimhood can be incredibly convincing. When confronted with their harmful actions, the manipulator doesn't engage with the substance of the complaint. Instead, they pivot immediately to their own alleged suffering. They might cry, become withdrawn and sullen, sigh dramatically, or utter self-pitying phrases like, "I can never do anything right. Everyone always gangs up on me." Or, "I guess my feelings just don't matter." Their voice might tremble, their eyes well up. This display shifts the focus entirely away from their behavior and onto their supposed pain. This tactic is devastatingly effective because it exploits our empathy. When we see someone seemingly hurting, our instinct is to soften, to offer comfort, to de-escalate. It feels cruel to continue criticizing someone who is already down, The manipulator counts on this. Your legitimate anger or request for accountability is suddenly reframed as an attack on someone vulnerable. You find yourself backing down, apologizing, or comforting the very person who hurt you. The original issue is forgotten, accountability is dissolved, and the manipulator successfully evades consequences, while simultaneously reinforcing their image as the wounded party. Over time, this dynamic creates a chilling effect. You learn that holding the manipulator accountable will inevitably lead to a performance of suffering that leaves you feeling guilty and cruel. You start avoiding confrontation altogether. You minimize their bad behavior, make excuses for them, and absorb the emotional fallout yourself, simply to avoid triggering another victim-playing episode. This allows the manipulator to continue their harmful patterns unchecked. Victim playing isn't genuine vulnerability. It's a power play disguised as pain. It ensures the manipulator remains blameless by forcing everyone around them to constantly walk on eggshells, forever prioritizing the manipulator's feigned fragility over their own legitimate needs and feelings. 37. The imaginary majority. Imagine you're in a disagreement, and the other person, instead of addressing your points, says something like, "Everyone knows that's not how it works," or "Nobody else has a problem with this, just you." Suddenly, the argument isn't just between the two of you anymore. They've invoked an invisible, powerful ally, the unanimous opinion of the entire world. This is the false consensus trick, a manipulative tactic designed to isolate you, invalidate your perspective, and pressure you into compliance by creating the illusion that your thoughts or feelings are abnormal, unpopular, and fundamentally wrong. Compared to an imaginary majority, this trick works by exploiting our deep-seated fear of social exclusion. Humans are wired for belonging. The idea of being the sole outlier, the crazy one who sees things differently from everyone else, is deeply unsettling. The manipulator knows this. They don't need actual evidence that everyone agrees with them. They just need to plant the suggestion in your mind. By using phrases like "most people," "anyone can see," or referencing vague groups, "my friends all say," "people are talking," they create a sense of overwhelming consensus aligned against you. Your brain, instinctively seeking social validation, starts to waver. If everyone else thinks this, maybe I am wrong. Maybe I am overreacting. That moment of self-doubt is the manipulator's victory. They haven't won the argument with logic. They've won by making you feel isolated and abnormal. The focus shifts from the validity of your point to the validity of you. This tactic is often used to shut down legitimate complaints or enforce unreasonable demands. If you express discomfort with someone's behavior, they might retort, "You're literally the only person who's ever had an issue with this," instantly framing you as the problem. What makes the false consensus trick so insidious is that the consensus is often entirely fabricated. The manipulator might be referencing imaginary conversations, exaggerating the opinions of one or two people, or simply projecting their own views onto a non-existent everyone. They create an echo chamber out of thin air and then punish you for standing outside it over time. Repeated exposure to this tactic can severely erode your confidence in your own judgment. You might start silencing yourself preemptively, assuming your perspective is likely wrong if it differs from the manipulator-defined norm. Breaking free requires trusting your own perception, even when someone tries to convince you that you're the only one seeing the truth. 38. Twisting your tongue. Communication requires a shared understanding of meaning. But what happens when someone intentionally distorts that meaning for their own gain? Deliberate misinterpretation is a manipulative tactic where a person purposefully twists your words, actions, or intentions into something negative, often completely unrelated to your original meaning, in order to derail a conversation, avoid accountability, put you on the defensive, or paint you as the villain. It's not a genuine misunderstanding. It's the strategic weaponization of language itself, designed to sabotage communication and control the narrative. It often happens swiftly and subtly during a disagreement, or when you try to express a need or boundary. You say, "I feel disconnected when we don't spend quality time together," and they retort, "Oh, so now I'm neglecting you? I guess everything I do isn't good enough." You state, "I need some space to think," and they accuse you of abandoning them or giving them the silent treatment. They don't respond to what you actually said. They respond to a distorted, exaggerated, negative version they've created in its place. This immediately forces you onto the back foot. Instead of discussing the original issue, you find yourself desperately trying to clarify your meaning, defend your intentions, and correct their misinterpretation. "No, that's not what I meant at all. I just meant." But this defensive scramble is exactly what the manipulator wants. It shifts the focus away from their behavior and onto your alleged poor communication or hostile intent. Every attempt you make to explain yourself often provides them with more material to twist. They aren't interested in understanding, they are interested in winning, and they win by controlling the meaning of your words. This tactic is incredibly effective at shutting down productive conversation and eroding trust. You learn that expressing yourself honestly is risky, as your words can and likely will be used against you. You start speaking in carefully measured, overly cautious sentences, constantly trying to anticipate how your words might be distorted. You might eventually stop speaking up altogether, choosing silence over the exhausting and painful process of being constantly misrepresented. Deliberate misinterpretation allows the manipulator to avoid facing uncomfortable truths, maintain a position of victimhood, and control the emotional tone of the relationship, all while making you feel crazy for simply trying to communicate clearly. 39. The invisible electric fence. Imagine a dog trained with an invisible electric fence. After receiving a few shocks when approaching the boundary, the dog learns to associate the edge of the yard with pain. Soon, it doesn't even need the shock. The mere proximity to the boundary triggers fear and avoidance. Anchoring negative emotions is a human equivalent of this conditioning. It's a manipulative tactic where a person intentionally creates a strong, negative emotional association, like fear, anxiety, shame, or guilt, with a specific person, place, topic, behavior, or even a neutral phrase. Once this anchor is set, the mere presence of the trigger automatically evokes the negative feeling, controlling the target's behavior through conditioned emotional reflexes, often without them even understanding why they feel that way. The manipulator creates these anchors by repeatedly pairing a neutral stimulus with a negative experience. Perhaps every time you express excitement about a personal achievement, they meet it with criticism or dismissal, anchoring your success to feelings of shame or inadequacy. Maybe they consistently start an argument or become cold and withdrawn every time you try to spend time with certain friends, anchoring those friendships to anxiety and guilt. They might use a specific phrase like, "We need to talk," only before delivering harsh criticism, anchoring those words to dread. The key is the consistent pairing of the trigger with the emotional punishment. Over time, your nervous system learns the association. The trigger itself becomes sufficient to evoke the negative emotional state, even in the absence of any current threat or punishment. You start feeling anxious when your phone rings with a call from a specific person. Your stomach drops when a particular topic is mentioned. You feel inexplicably guilty when pursuing a hobby they once criticized. You begin to unconsciously avoid the triggers, the friends, the topics, the ambitions, not necessarily because you logically decided to, but because the associated negative feeling is too uncomfortable. This tactic is incredibly insidious because it bypasses rational thought. You can consciously know that you shouldn't feel anxious about seeing your friends, but the anchor, once installed, triggers the emotional response automatically. The manipulator gains immense control without needing to exert constant pressure. They've essentially installed invisible electric fences around the parts of your life they want to restrict. You limit your own freedom, silence your own joy, and avoid your own growth, all because of the emotional pain anchored to those experiences. Breaking free requires recognizing these conditioned responses and consciously working to decouple the trigger from the implanted emotion. 40. Kindness is currency. Imagine meeting someone who seems almost too good to be true. They shower you with compliments, listen intently, offer help before you even ask, and remember small details about you that make you feel incredibly seen and valued. This overwhelming charm and attentiveness feel wonderful, like genuine connection. But sometimes, this behavior isn't kindness. It's ingratiation, a calculated manipulation tactic where someone uses excessive flattery, favors, and apparent admiration not out of genuine liking, but as a strategic investment to lower your defenses, gain your trust, and create a sense of indebtedness that they can later exploit for control or personal gain. It's treating kindness not as a gift, but as currency. The manipulator employing ingratiation is essentially buttering you up. They identify what makes you feel good, perhaps praise for your intelligence, admiration for your strength, or appreciation for your strength, or appreciation for your efforts. And they deliver it in abundance. They might offer unsolicited help, agree enthusiastically with your opinions, or subtly mirror your values. This initial phase is designed to make you feel special, indebted, and, most importantly, trusting. It bypasses your natural caution because the interaction feels overwhelmingly positive. You let them into your inner circle quickly, believing you found a uniquely supportive friend, partner, or colleague. However, beneath the surface, a transaction is occurring. Every compliment, every favor, every act of apparent selflessness is logged in their mental ledger. They are building up social credit with you, creating an unspoken obligation. Once they feel they have sufficiently ingratiated themselves, the request inevitably comes. It might be a demand for your time, loyalty, resources, or silence on an uncomfortable issue. Because they have been so good to you. Saying no feels incredibly difficult, awkward, and even mean. You feel pressured to comply, not necessarily because the request is reasonable, but because refusing feels like a betrayal of the kindness they've shown you. The mask often slips if you do resist. The person who was once so charming might suddenly become cold, guilt-tripping, or subtly critical. The compliments cease, the favors stop, revealing that the initial warmth was conditional upon your compliance. Ingratiation thrives in environments where approval and social connection are highly valued. It targets our natural desire to be liked and appreciated, turning that desire into a vulnerability. Recognizing this tactic requires looking beyond the surface charm and asking whether the kindness feels genuine and unconditional, or whether it feels like an investment waiting for a return. True kindness expects nothing back. Ingratiation always comes with a hidden price tag. 41. The echo trap. Imagine meeting someone who seems to finish your sentences, share your deepest fears, and articulate your most cherished dreams with uncanny precision. They echo your values, mirror your frustrations, and validate your unique perspective on the world. You feel an instant, profound connection, a sense of being truly seen and understood, perhaps for the first time. This exhilarating feeling of perfect alignment is the bait in the echoic agreement trap. It's a manipulative tactic where someone doesn't just listen to you. They become a near-perfect reflection of you, mirroring your thoughts and feelings, not out of genuine empathy, but as a calculated strategy to rapidly gain your trust and lower your defenses. The manipulator employing this tactic is like a chameleon, adapting their persona to match yours. They listen intently when you share something vulnerable or passionate, not necessarily to understand you, but to gather data. They memorize your key phrases, your core beliefs, your emotional triggers. Then they skillfully reflect this information back to you, often framed as their own deeply held convictions or uncannily similar experiences. That's exactly how I feel. I've always believed that too. It's like you're reading my mind. This creates a powerful illusion of resonance. Your brain, wired to trust those who seem similar to us, interprets this echo as a sign of safety, compatibility, and trustworthiness. You find yourself opening up more quickly, sharing secrets, and investing emotionally far faster than you normally would. This accelerated intimacy is precisely the goal. Once the manipulator feels they have established this deep, albeit false bond, the subtle shift begins. The perfect agreement starts to fray at the edges. They might gently question a belief they previously shared, subtly steer you towards a different perspective, or express disappointment when you don't conform to an expectation they never explicitly stated but implied through their mirroring. Because you are already operating under the assumption of shared understanding, you are likely to blame yourself for the disconnect. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I need to adjust my thinking. You start conforming, trying to get back to that initial state of perfect harmony, not realizing that harmony was a performance. The echoic agreement trap doesn't force compliance. It seduces it. It gets you to willingly hand over your trust, and eventually, parts of your own perspective, because you believe you're aligning with someone who is fundamentally like you. It's a form of manipulation that feels like connection, turning your desire to be understood into the very mechanism that makes you vulnerable. It's common in toxic relationships, cult recruitment, and manipulative friendships, beginning with echoes to gain entry before altering your internal landscape. 42. The Mirage of Scarcity. Imagine wandering through a desert, parched and desperate. When you see a shimmering oasis on the horizon, you quicken your pace, driven by the urgent need for the life-saving water it promises. This intense focus, born from perceived scarcity, is exactly what the false scarcity illusion aims to create in your emotional or professional life. It is a manipulation tactic where someone artificially manufactures the impression that their affection, attention, approval, or a specific opportunity is incredibly rare, highly sought after, and perpetually at risk of disappearing. This triggers your fear of loss and insecurity, pressuring you to act fast, compete fiercely, and accept less than you deserve, all in pursuit of a mirage. The manipulator employing this tactic subtly, or not so subtly, implies that what they offer is exceptionally valuable, and that you are lucky to even be considered. In relationships, they might hint at other admirers, constantly mention attractive friends, or remind you how many people would love to be in your position. You know, anyone would be lucky to have me. You're lucky I chose. In a work context, a boss might emphasize how competitive the job market is, or how many other candidates wanted your role, implying you should be grateful for whatever you get. The underlying message is always the same. What I have is scarce. You are replaceable, and you need to work hard to keep your spot. This manufactured scarcity hijacks your survival instincts. It activates your fear of missing out, FOMO, and preys on insecurities about your own worth. You start believing that you must secure this relationship or opportunity immediately, before someone else snaps it up. This sense of urgency short-circuits your rational thinking. You become less likely to notice red flags, negotiate terms, or enforce boundaries because you're operating from a place of fear. The fear of losing this supposedly rare and precious thing. You might find yourself overgiving, tolerating disrespect, or accepting unfair conditions, all because you've bought into the illusion that this is your only chance. The cruel irony is that the scarcity is often entirely fabricated. The manipulator might not have other options lined up. They simply know that making you believe they do gives them immense power. They create a competitive dynamic where none exists, forcing you to constantly prove your value. The oasis they offer is often just a reflection of your own desires, made to seem exclusive. Recognizing this tactic requires stepping back from the manufactured urgency and assessing the situation objectively. Is this opportunity or person genuinely rare and valuable, or are you being pressured by an artificially created fear of loss? True value doesn't need to create panic. False scarcity thrives on it. 43. The withdrawn reward. Imagine being showered with praise and admiration. You're told you're brilliant, talented, special. Everything you do seems to elicit positive reinforcement. This feels wonderful, validating, addictive even. Then, abruptly, and without explanation, the praise stops. The compliments vanish. The affirmation disappears, replaced by neutral silence or even subtle criticism. You're left feeling confused, anxious, and slightly panicked. What changed? What did I do wrong? This destabilizing dynamic is tactical praise withdrawal, a manipulation technique where positive reinforcement is deliberately given and then withheld to create insecurity, emotional dependence, and a desperate drive to regain the manipulator's goal. Approval. This tactic operates in two distinct phases. First comes the setup, intense, often excessive, praise and validation. The manipulator identifies what makes you feel good about yourself and delivers it consistently. This isn't necessarily genuine admiration. It's the process of establishing the reward and getting you hooked on the positive feeling associated with their approval. You internalize their praise as a measure of your worth. Then comes the withdrawal. The positive feedback suddenly ceases. Actions that previously earned praise now receive indifference or critique. This abrupt shift triggers a powerful sense of loss and anxiety. Your brain, accustomed to the dopamine hit of their approval, goes into withdrawal. You start questioning yourself. Was the initial praise even real? Am I not good enough anymore? This self-doubt is the intended effect. The manipulator has created an emotional vacuum, and you instinctively scramble to fill it by figuring out how to earn back their positive regard. You might try harder, apologize for perceived mistakes, or change your behavior, essentially guessing what will make the praise return. The manipulator watches this process, maintaining control through their silence or continued neutrality. Eventually, they might offer a small, unpredictable crumb of praise, often timed perfectly after you've shown significant effort or compliance. This intermittent reinforcement is incredibly powerful. The relief and joy you feel from that small reward are disproportionately intense because they follow a period of deprivation. This reinforces the pattern. Compliance and striving might lead to approval. You become conditioned to chase their validation, trapped in a cycle where your self-worth is perpetually tied to their unpredictable feedback. Tactical praise withdrawal isn't about fostering growth. It's about fostering dependence by making approval a scarce and controllable commodity. 44. The unpayable debt. Generosity and reciprocity are cornerstones of healthy human connection. We naturally feel inclined to give back when someone is kind to us. However, distorted reciprocity twists this positive instinct into a powerful tool for manipulation. It occurs when someone appears excessively generous, showering you with unsolicited favors, gifts, or support, not out of genuine kindness, but to intentionally create a heavy sense of unspoken obligation. This manufactured debt is then later leveraged to demand compliance, silence, or sacrifices far exceeding the value of the original gift, trapping you in a cycle of guilt and repayment. The tactic usually begins with a display of overwhelming generosity. The manipulator might go significantly out of their way to help you, offer extravagant gifts you didn't ask for, or provide intense emotional support during a vulnerable time. This initial phase feels wonderful. You feel cared for, supported, perhaps even rescued. You develop feelings of gratitude and trust, viewing the manipulator as a truly kind and selfless person. You might even feel a natural desire to reciprocate in some way. However, the shift occurs when the manipulator decides to cash in on their investment. They start making requests, perhaps for your time, your loyalty in a conflict, your agreement on something important, or even expecting you to tolerate poor behavior. If you hesitate or decline, the guilt-tripping begins, subtly or overtly reminding you of their past generosity. After everything I've done for you, you can't do this one thing for me. I thought we were closer than that. I guess I just care more. What felt like a gift is suddenly reframed as a loan, and repayment is demanded in the currency of compliance. This puts you in a moral bind. Saying no feels profoundly wrong, like an act of betrayal or ingratitude. You feel obligated to repay the debt, even though the terms were never agreed upon, and the initial generosity may have been deliberately excessive to create this exact situation. You find yourself compromising your boundaries, silencing your needs, or doing things you're uncomfortable with, all to even the score. But the score is rigged. The manipulator often inflates the value of their contribution while minimizing yours, ensuring the debt is never fully repaid. They maintain leverage by keeping you perpetually in their emotional pocket. Real kindness is freely given. Distorted reciprocity always comes with invisible strings designed to pull you exactly where the manipulator wants you to go. 45. Scrambling your signal. Our brains thrive on patterns. Conversations follow predictable rhythms. Social interactions have expected scripts, and our thoughts flow along familiar channels. Neurolinguistic pattern disruption is a manipulation tactic that deliberately breaks these patterns to induce a momentary state of confusion or cognitive disorientation. By interrupting your expected sequence of thoughts, emotions, or behaviors, the manipulator creates a brief window of vulnerability, a mental glitch, during which your critical thinking is bypassed, making you more susceptible to suggestion, influence, or control. It's like momentarily scrambling your brain's signal to slip a hidden message through the static. This tactic works because our subconscious mind handles most routine interactions. When everything flows predictably, we operate on autopilot. But when something unexpected or nonsensical occurs, our conscious analytical mind is jolted into attention, demanding, "What just happened?" This brief pause, this moment of trying to reorient, is where the disruption creates an opening. The manipulator might suddenly change the subject during an intense argument, inject bizarre humor into a serious situation, ask a deeply personal or philosophical question completely out of context, or abruptly shift their emotional state from anger to calm, or vice versa. Consider an argument where tensions are high. Just as you're about to make a crucial point, the manipulator might suddenly say something utterly random and disarming, like, "Have you ever noticed how blue the sky is today?" Your train of thought derails. You pause, confused. In that pause, the emotional intensity of the argument dissipates, and the manipulator may seize the opportunity to subtly change the topic, deflect blame, or offer a weak resolution that you, in your slightly disoriented state, are more likely to accept just to regain a sense of normalcy. Pattern disruption can also be used to implant suggestions. By interrupting a routine action or thought process, the manipulator can insert a command or idea during the moment of confusion, increasing the likelihood that it will be accepted subconsciously. This technique is sometimes used in aggressive sales, high-pressure persuasion, and even certain therapeutic or hypnotic contexts, though its ethical use is highly debated. The key is the element of surprise and confusion, which temporarily lowers your mental defenses. What makes this tactic so unsettling is that you often don't realize you've been manipulated. You just walk away feeling slightly off balance, unsure why you agreed to something, changed your mind, or suddenly felt differently, unaware that your mental patterns were deliberately scrambled. 46. The calculated confession. Vulnerability is the bedrock of genuine human connection. Sharing our fears, struggles, and past wounds allows for deep intimacy and trust to form. However, this sacred space can be exploited. Strategic self-disclosure is a manipulative tactic where someone intentionally shares personal, often sensitive or seemingly vulnerable, information not as an act of authentic sharing, but as a calculated performance designed to rapidly build false intimacy, disarm your suspicions, and encourage you to reciprocate with your own vulnerabilities. It mimics closeness to gain access. The manipulator employing this tactic often appears incredibly open, and trusting early on. They might share a sob story about a difficult past, confess a deep-seated insecurity, or reveal a seemingly private detail about their life, often accompanied by phrases like, "I don't normally tell people this," or "I feel like I can really trust you." This performance of vulnerability catches you off guard. It feels like an honor, a sign of special connection. Your natural empathetic response kicks in, and more importantly, the principle of reciprocity creates a subtle pressure for you to match their level of openness. You think, they trusted me with something deep, so I should trust them too. Without realizing it, you start sharing your own secrets, fears, and vulnerabilities, believing you are building a mutual bond. But the manipulator's disclosure was often strategic, not spontaneous. Their story may be exaggerated, selectively edited, or even a complete fabrication, carefully chosen to resonate with your perceived empathy or experiences. While you are genuinely opening up, they are often gathering information, assessing your weaknesses, and solidifying your trust based on a manufactured connection. They aren't building a bridge. They're mapping your defenses. This tactic is common in the early stages of toxic relationships, cult recruitment, and interactions with con artists. It fast-tracks intimacy, bypassing the normal gradual process of getting to know someone. You feel deeply connected much faster than usual, making you more likely to overlook red flags or inconsistencies. Later, the information you shared in perceived confidence may be weaponized against you, used to guilt trip, shame, or control you. The manipulator's initial vulnerability is revealed to have been a Trojan horse, used to gain entry into your emotional world under false pretenses. Recognizing strategic self-disclosure requires pacing intimacy, observing consistency over time, and understanding that true vulnerability is earned, not performed on demand. 47. The power of maybe. Clarity is the foundation of trust and security in relationships. Knowing where you stand allows you to make informed decisions and feel emotionally safe. Ambiguity control is a manipulation tactic that deliberately undermines this foundation. It involves the intentional use of vagueness, mixed signals, non-committal language, and avoidance of clear definitions to keep you perpetually uncertain, guessing, and emotionally off balance. The manipulator maintains control not through direct commands, but by managing the level of ambiguity in the dynamic, ensuring you never feel secure enough to relax, but always hopeful enough to stay. This tactic often manifests in refusal to define the relationship. You ask, "What are we?" And they respond with vague deflections like, "Why do we need labels?" Or "I'm just enjoying our time together." They might shower you with intense affection one day and become distant and unavailable the next, offering no explanation for the shift. They make vague promises about the future but resist any concrete plans. They express feelings indirectly, leaving you constantly trying to decipher their true intentions. Their communication is a carefully crafted fog. This intentional lack of clarity forces you to do all the emotional heavy lifting. You spend hours analyzing their texts, replaying conversations, seeking hidden meanings, and trying to predict their behavior. Your mind becomes consumed with trying to solve the puzzle of where do I stand. This constant mental effort creates a deep, albeit unhealthy, investment in the relationship. The manipulator outsources their responsibility for clarity onto your anxiety. The more confused and uncertain you feel, the more power they hold. Because you start looking to them for answers they deliberately withhold. Ambiguity control keeps you hooked on potential. The moments of connection or affection, interspersed with periods of distance, act as intermittent reinforcement. You cling to the good times as proof that clarity and commitment might be possible, if only you wait long enough, try hard enough, or figure out the right way to be. The manipulator never has to fully commit or reject you. They keep you suspended in a state of maybe, which is often more torturous than a definitive no. This tactic allows them to enjoy the benefits of connection without the responsibilities of commitment, all while keeping you emotionally tethered and perpetually unsure of your footing. 48. The utility trap. In healthy relationships, value is inherent. You are cherished for who you are, not just for what you do. But in manipulative dynamics, a subtle and corrosive shift can occur. Value extraction framing is a psychological tactic where the manipulator consistently frames your worth based entirely on your usefulness to them. Every interaction, compliment, and expectation revolves around what you provide. Your help, your resources, your emotional support, your compliance. It subtly conditions you to believe that your value is not intrinsic but transactional, measured solely by your utility. The unspoken message becomes chillingly clear: be useful or be worthless. This often begins with praise that feels good but is strategically targeted. Instead of complimenting your character, they praise your actions that benefit them. You're so reliable, I can always count on you. You're amazing at fixing things, or I don't know what I'd do without your support. While seemingly positive, this focus constantly reinforces the idea that your function is what makes you valuable. You feel appreciated, needed, perhaps even indispensable. You start taking pride in your ability to serve, to fix, to provide, not realizing that this role is becoming the sole basis of your perceived worth in their eyes. This framing subtly shifts the entire dynamic. You begin to anticipate their needs, often before your own. You overextend yourself, taking on more responsibility, giving more emotional labor, sacrificing your time and energy, all to maintain that feeling of being valued and indispensable. You hesitate to ask for things in return or to express your own needs, fearing it might make you seem high maintenance or less useful, thereby jeopardizing your position. You have unconsciously accepted the premise: your worth must be continually earned through service. The manipulator reinforces this by reacting negatively when you fail to be useful or when you assert your own needs. Suddenly, the praise vanishes. You might be met with disappointment, criticism, guilt-tripping, or the silent treatment. The message is clear: when you stop providing, your value drops. This conditions you to quickly return to your useful role to regain their approval. Value extraction framing doesn't require overt demands. It works by subtly altering your self-perception. Over time, you can lose sight of your inherent worth, believing that love, acceptance, and security are things you must constantly do something to deserve. You become trapped, measuring your value not by who you are, but by how effectively you serve the manipulator's needs. 49. The whiplash of the mind. Imagine you're walking down a street late at night when you hear rapid footsteps behind you. Your heart pounds, your muscles tense, and your mind is flooded with a singular primal focus: danger. This is your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, triggering a fight-or-flight response. Now, imagine the person runs past you, just a harmless jogger. In that instant, a wave of profound relief washes over you. Your body relaxes, your mind goes momentarily blank, and you feel a strange sense of calm. It is in this precise moment of mental whiplash that you are at your most vulnerable and suggestible. This is the fear then relief technique, a powerful manipulation tactic where an induced state of fear is abruptly followed by a comforting resolution, making the target significantly more compliant. The technique works by intentionally disrupting our normal cognitive processes. When we are afraid, our rational mind, located in the prefrontal cortex, is essentially hijacked. Our focus narrows, and we are unable to think critically or logically. All our mental resources are dedicated to assessing and escaping the threat. When the threat is suddenly removed, the brain doesn't just snap back to normal. It experiences a temporary refractory period, a moment of disorientation and cognitive exhaustion. In this state of relief, our critical thinking defenses are still down, leaving us open to any suggestion that is presented as a path back to safety and normalcy. One of the classic examples is a boss calling you in to say, "We need to talk about your job status right now," inducing panic, only to follow up with, "Don't worry, you're safe, but I need you to take on this extra project." A partner might threaten to leave. "I can't do this anymore," causing immense distress. Then suddenly relent. "Okay, I'll stay. But things need to change," making you overly agreeable to their terms. The sudden removal of the threat creates a powerful sense of gratitude, often directed towards the manipulator. You feel relieved that the worst didn't happen, and this relief makes you more likely to trust or comply with the person who just put you through the emotional ringer. Scam emails often use this: "Your account is compromised." Fear. Click here to secure it immediately. Relief. You act quickly out of relief, bypassing caution. The danger lies in how this tactic builds a twisted dependence. You start associating the feeling of safety with the person who created the danger. You become conditioned to comply to avoid the fear phase, clinging to the manipulator as the source of resolution, even when they are the source of the initial threat. Recognizing this pattern requires pausing during the relief phase and asking if the initial fear was genuine or manufactured to manipulate your response. 50. The stolen reflection. Imagine finally finding the courage to share something deeply personal and vulnerable. A childhood trauma, a painful insecurity, a secret fear. As you speak, the person listening looks at you with profound understanding, nods intently, and then shares a story from their own past that sounds remarkably, almost eerily, similar. "That's incredible," they might say. "I went through the exact same thing." In that moment, a powerful sense of connection floods you. You feel seen, validated, and profoundly understood, perhaps for the first time. This intense accelerated intimacy is the goal of reverse mirroring, a more specific application of mirroring vulnerabilities, a deeply manipulative tactic where someone feigns shared experiences and emotional scars, not to build genuine empathy, but genuine empathy, to rapidly gain your trust and exploit your openness by becoming a reflection of you. This technique is far more insidious than simple active listening or finding common ground. The manipulator isn't just relating to you. They are actively constructing a persona based on your pain, your passions, your language. They carefully study your disclosures, your word choices, your emotional tone, the specific details of your story, and then reflect them back to you, often with just enough variation to seem authentic. They become a perfect echo of your inner world. This mirroring bypasses the slow, natural process of building trust. It creates an instant, powerful bond based on the illusion of shared identity and suffering. You feel safe, you drop your guard, and you begin to reveal even more, believing you've found a kindred spirit. But the vulnerability they display is often a performance. Their stories might be exaggerated, borrowed, or outright fabricated, designed solely to trigger your empathy and encourage reciprocity. While you are baring your soul, they are often gathering intelligence. Every fear you confess, every insecurity you reveal, becomes potential ammunition they can use against you later. Once they feel they have secured your trust and emotional investment, the mask often begins to slip. The same person who seemed to understand your deepest wounds might suddenly use them to guilt, trip you, criticize you, or dismiss your feelings. "You're letting your past control you," they might say, using the very information you shared in confidence. This betrayal is profoundly damaging because it strikes at the core of your vulnerability. You feel foolish, exposed, and deeply confused. How could someone who seemed to understand you so intimately turn on you? The truth is, they never understood you. They studied you. They used your identity as a key to unlock your trust. Reverse mirroring isn't about shared healing. It's emotional espionage, leaving the victim feeling not only hurt by the present manipulation, but also tainted by the counterfeit connection they thought was real. A connection built not with them, but with them, but with a stolen reflection of yourself. 51. The utility trap. In healthy relationships, value is inherent. You are cherished for who you are, not just for what you do. But in manipulative dynamics, a subtle and corrosive shift can occur. Value extraction framing is a psychological tactic where the manipulator consistently frames your worth based entirely on your usefulness to them. Every interaction, compliment, and expectation revolves around what you provide. Your help, your resources, your emotional support, your compliance. It subtly conditions you to believe that your value is not intrinsic but transactional, measured solely by your utility. The unspoken message becomes chillingly clear: be useful or be worthless. This often begins with praise that feels good but is strategically targeted. Instead of complimenting your character, they praise your actions that benefit them. You're so reliable, I can always count on you. You're amazing at fixing things. Or I don't know what I'd do without your support. While seemingly positive, this focus constantly reinforces the idea that your function is what makes you valuable. You feel appreciated, needed, perhaps even indispensable. You start taking pride in your ability to serve, to fix, to provide, not realizing that this role is becoming the sole basis of your perceived worth in their eyes. This framing subtly shifts the entire dynamic. You begin to anticipate their needs, often before your own. You overextend yourself, taking on more responsibility, giving more emotional labor, sacrificing your time and energy, all to maintain that feeling of being valued and indispensable. You hesitate to ask for things in return or to express your own needs, fearing it might make you seem high maintenance or less useful, thereby jeopardizing your position. You have unconsciously accepted the premise: your worth must be continually earned through service. The manipulator reinforces this by reacting negatively when you fail to be useful or when you assert your own needs. Suddenly, the praise vanishes. You might be met with disappointment, criticism, guilt-tripping, or the silent treatment. The message is clear: when you stop providing, your value drops. This conditions you to quickly return to your useful role to regain their approval. Value extraction framing doesn't require overt demands. It works by subtly altering your self-perception. Over time, you can lose sight of your inherent worth, believing that love, acceptance, and security are things you must constantly do something to deserve. You become trapped, measuring your value not by who you are, but by how effectively you serve the manipulator's needs. 52. The whiplash of the mind. Imagine you're walking down a street late at night when you hear rapid footsteps behind you. Your heart pounds, your muscles tense, and your mind is flooded with a singular primal focus: danger. This is your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, triggering a fight-or-flight response. Now imagine the person runs past you, just a harmless jogger. In that instant, a wave of profound relief washes over you. Your body relaxes, your mind goes momentarily blank, and you feel a strange sense of calm. It is in this precise moment of mental whiplash that you are at your most vulnerable and suggestible. This is the fear then relief technique, a powerful manipulation tactic where an induced state of fear is abruptly followed by a comforting resolution, making the target significantly more compliant. The technique works by intentionally disrupting our normal cognitive processes. When we are afraid, our rational mind, located in the prefrontal cortex, is essentially hijacked. Our focus narrows, and we are unable to think critically or logically. All our mental resources are dedicated to assessing and escaping the threat. When the threat is suddenly removed, the brain doesn't just snap back to normal. It experiences a temporary refractory period, a moment of disorientation and cognitive exhaustion. In this state of relief, our critical thinking defenses are still down, leaving us open to any suggestion that is presented as a path back to safety and normalcy. One of the classic examples of this is the good cop, bad cop routine. The bad cop induces fear and anxiety, threatening dire consequences. Then the good cop enters, removes the threat, and offers a simple, comforting solution. Just cooperate with me, and we can make all of this go away. The suspect, still reeling from the emotional whiplash, is far more likely to comply with the good cop's reasonable request. High-pressure sales tactics use the same script. A salesperson might warn you about a serious risk. If you don't buy this insurance, you could lose everything, creating a spike of fear. Then, they offer an easy solution. But with this simple monthly payment, you'll be completely protected, making the purchase feel like an act of relief rather than a financial decision. Scam emails and phishing attempts are digital versions of this tactic. They start with a terrifying message: your account has been compromised. Then, they offer immediate relief. Click this link to secure your account now. In your state of fear-induced panic, you are less likely to notice the red flags and more likely to click the malicious link. To defend against this, you must learn to recognize when your fear is being manufactured. When you feel a sudden spike of anxiety followed by an easy solution, pause. Take a deep breath. Give your rational mind a moment to come back online. Ask yourself, is this threat real, or is it being used to rush me into a decision? 53. The stolen reflection. Imagine finally finding the courage to share something deeply personal and vulnerable. A childhood trauma, a painful insecurity, a secret fear. As you speak, the person listening looks at you with profound understanding, nods intently, and then shares a story from their own past that sounds remarkably, almost eerily, similar. That's incredible, they might say. I went through the exact same thing. In that moment, a powerful sense of connection floods you. You feel seen, validated, and profoundly understood, perhaps for the first time. This intense, accelerated intimacy is the goal of reverse mirroring, a more specific application of mirroring vulnerabilities, a deeply manipulative tactic where someone feigns shared experiences and emotional scars, not to build genuine empathy, to rapidly gain your trust and exploit your openness by becoming a reflection of you. This technique is far more insidious than simple active listening or finding common ground. The manipulator isn't just relating to you. They are actively constructing a persona based on your pain, your passions, your language. They carefully study your disclosures, your word choices, your emotional tone, the specific details of your story, and then reflect them back to you, often with just enough variation to seem authentic. They become a perfect echo of your inner world. This mirroring bypasses the slow, natural process of building trust. It creates an instant, powerful bond based on the illusion of shared identity and suffering. You feel safe. You drop your guard, and you begin to reveal even more, believing you found a kindred spirit. But the vulnerability they display is often a performance. Their stories might be exaggerated, borrowed, or outright fabricated, designed solely to trigger your empathy and encourage reciprocity. While you are bearing your soul, they are gathering intelligence. Every fear you confess, every insecurity you reveal, becomes potential ammunition they can use against you later. Once they feel they have secured your trust and emotional investment, the mask often begins to slip. The same person who seemed to understand your deepest wounds might suddenly use them to guilt, trip you, criticize you, or dismiss your feelings. You're letting your past control you, they might say, using the very information you shared in confidence. This betrayal is profoundly damaging because it strikes at the core of your vulnerability. You feel foolish, exposed, and deeply confused. How could someone who seemed to understand you so intimately turn on you? The truth is, they never understood you. They studied you. They used your identity as a key to unlock your trust. Reverse mirroring isn't about shared healing. It's emotional espionage, leaving the victim feeling not only hurt by the present manipulation, but also tainted by the counterfeit connection they thought was real. A connection built not with them, but connection built not with them. With a stolen reflection of yourself. 54. The imaginary majority. Imagine you're in a disagreement, and the other person, Instead of addressing your points, says something like, "Everyone knows that's not how it works," or "Nobody else has a problem with this, just you." Suddenly, the argument isn't just between the two of you anymore. They've invoked an invisible, powerful ally, the unanimous opinion of the entire world. This is social proof hoaxing, a manipulative tactic designed to isolate you, invalidate your perspective, and pressure you into compliance by creating the illusion that your thoughts or feelings are abnormal, unpopular, and fundamentally wrong. Compared to an imaginary majority, it weaponizes the power of consensus, even when that consensus is entirely fabricated. This trick works by exploiting our deep-seated fear of social exclusion and our reliance on social proof, the tendency to assume the actions of others reflect correct behavior. Humans are wired for belonging, the idea of being the sole outlier, the crazy one who sees things differently from everyone else, is deeply unsettling. The manipulator knows this. They don't need actual evidence that everyone agrees with them. They just need to plant the suggestion in your mind. By using phrases like "most people," "anyone can see," or referencing vague, unnamed groups, "my friends all say," "people are talking," "experts agree," they create a sense of overwhelming consensus aligned against you. Your brain, instinctively seeking social validation, starts to waver. If everyone else thinks this, maybe I am wrong. Maybe I am overreacting. That moment of self-doubt is the manipulator's victory. They haven't won the argument with logic. They've won by making you feel isolated and abnormal. The focus shifts from the validity of your point to the validity of you. This tactic is often used to shut down legitimate complaints or enforce unreasonable demands. If you express discomfort with someone's behavior, they might retort, "You're literally the only person who's ever had an issue with this," instantly framing you as the problem by inventing a phantom norm. What makes social proof hoaxing so insidious is that the consensus is often entirely fabricated or wildly exaggerated. The manipulator might be referencing imaginary conversations, twisting the opinions of one or two people into a universal agreement, or simply projecting their own views onto a non-existent everyone. They create an echo chamber out of thin air and air, and then punish you for standing outside it over time. Repeated exposure can severely erode your confidence. You might start silencing yourself preemptively, assuming your perspective is likely wrong. Breaking free requires trusting your own perception, demanding specific evidence for these claims of consensus, and recognizing that manufactured popularity is not the same as truth. 55. Apples and arsenic. Imagine you confront someone about a serious betrayal. Perhaps they lied, cheated, or deeply violated your trust. Instead of addressing their actions, they immediately fire back, "Oh yeah? Well, remember that time you forgot my birthday? You're not perfect either." This is false equivalence framing, a manipulative tactic that deflects accountability by comparing two fundamentally different things, as if they hold the same moral weight or level of severity. It's a distortion of logic designed to muddy the waters, minimize the manipulator's wrongdoing, and make you feel hypocritical or equally culpable, effectively shutting down the conversation. It's like comparing apples and arsenic and pretending they're both just fruit. This tactic thrives in conflict situations where accountability is being sought. The manipulator, feeling cornered, searches for any minor flaw or past mistake of yours, no matter how unrelated or disproportionate, and presents it as equivalent evidence of wrongdoing. You raised your voice, which is just as bad as me lying. You were texting a friend late at night. That's basically the same as my emotional affair. You criticize me sometimes, so you can't complain when I verbally abuse you. Sounds superficially fair. We both made mistakes, but they deliberately ignore context, intent, and the vastly different degrees of harm caused. False equivalence is incredibly disorienting because it often targets your desire to be fair and self-aware. You know you're not perfect, so when they point out one of your flaws, You might pause, reflect, and feel a pang of guilt. While you're busy examining your own, often minor, contribution to the conflict, the manipulator successfully diverts attention from their major transgression. They leverage your integrity against you. The more you try to be reasonable and acknowledge your small part, the more they inflate it to match their offense, neutralizing their responsibility. This tactic prevents genuine resolution because it refuses to acknowledge the actual scale of the harm. It creates a false moral equivalence where yelling is equated with infidelity, or forgetting an errand is equated with deliberate deception. Over time, this can erode your moral compass. You might start accepting shared blame for situations where you were clearly the wrong party. You learn to soften your complaints or avoid confrontation altogether, knowing your concerns will be met with a whataboutism that shifts the focus back onto you. Recognizing false equivalence requires holding firm to proportionality. Acknowledge your own imperfections, but refuse to let them be used as a smokescreen to excuse significantly more harmful behavior. 56. The cardboard crown. Humans are conditioned from a young age to respect authority. Parents, teachers, experts, leaders. This instinct is often necessary for social order, but it can be easily exploited. Artificial authority creation is a manipulation tactic where someone fabricates, exaggerates, or implies a level of status, expertise, knowledge, or credibility they do not actually possess, in order to command respect, gain trust, bypass scrutiny, and ensure compliance. They don't earn authority, they perform it, wearing a cardboard crown and expecting you to bow. This tactic works by triggering our automatic deference to perceived authority figures. The manipulator surrounds themselves with the symbols of authority, even if the substance is lacking. They might use impressive but vague job titles. Chief Visionary Officer, drop names of influential people they barely know, boast about unverifiable past achievements, use complex jargon to sound knowledgeable, or adopt an overly confident, assertive demeanor that brooks no argument. They might wear expensive clothes, display degrees from dubious institutions, or constantly reference their extensive experience without providing specifics. Their confidence becomes the proxy for competence in your mind. Once you accept their projected authority, a psychological shift occurs. You stop questioning their statements as critically. You begin to doubt your own knowledge or judgment, especially if it contradicts theirs. You feel hesitant to voice disagreement or ask for clarification, fearing you'll appear ignorant or disrespectful. You start deferring to their opinions, accepting their criticisms, and following their instructions, even if your gut instinct screams that something is wrong. The manipulator leverages this dynamic, often using phrases that reinforce their supposed superiority. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. You wouldn't understand the complexities, or people in my position see things differently. This tactic is rampant in various contexts. Cult leaders claiming divine insight, scam artists posing as financial gurus, toxic bosses exaggerating their expertise, and abusive partners asserting intellectual or moral superiority. What makes it so effective is that challenging artificial authority often feels socially risky. Questioning someone who presents themselves as powerful can feel like an act of rebellion. The manipulator counts on this hesitation. The defense against this is to separate the symbols of authority from the substance. Does their expertise hold up under scrutiny? Do their claims have verifiable evidence? Does their behavior align with their projected status? Real authority welcomes questions and provides proof. Artificial authority relies on performance and punishes doubt. 57. The weaponization of care. Empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, is one of humanity's greatest strengths, the bedrock of connection and compassion. But in the hands of a manipulator, it can become a devastating weapon. Empathy weaponization is an insidious tactic where someone exploits your capacity for care, compassion, and understanding to excuse their own harmful behavior, avoid accountability, manipulate your emotions, and keep you trapped in a dynamic that serves them. They don't appeal to your logic. They appeal directly to your heart, using their perceived pain as a shield against consequences. The tactic often unfolds when you try to confront the manipulator about something hurtful they've done. Instead of acknowledging their actions, apologizing, or engaging with your feelings, they immediately pivot to their own suffering. They might bring up their difficult childhood, a past trauma, current stressors, or simply dissolve into tears, claiming you are hurting them by bringing it up. How can you attack me like this when you know what I've been through? I'm trying my best. Can't you see I'm struggling? I guess I'm just a terrible person. The focus instantly shifts from their behavior to their pain. This maneuver is incredibly effective because it hijacks your natural empathetic response. When you see someone suffering, especially someone you care about, your instinct is to soothe, comfort, and protect. Your own hurt gets pushed aside as you rush to tend to their apparent emotional fragility. You feel guilty for causing them distress, even though they were the ones who initially caused harm. You find yourself comforting your abuser, apologizing for upsetting them, and backing down from your legitimate concerns. The manipulator successfully uses their performance of pain to silence your voice and evade responsibility. Over time, empathy weaponization conditions you to suppress your own needs and feelings. You learn that expressing dissatisfaction will be met with a display of suffering that leaves you feeling cruel and responsible for their emotional state. You start making excuses for their bad behavior, telling yourself, they don't mean it, they're just hurting. You prioritize their comfort over your own boundaries and well-being. This creates a deeply unhealthy dynamic, where your empathy becomes the very tool that enables their continued mistreatment. Recognizing this tactic requires understanding that while empathy is crucial, it should not be used as a justification for harm. Someone's pain does not give them a free pass to inflict pain on others, and your compassion does not obligate you to absorb abuse. 58. The edited past. Memory is notoriously unreliable, but selective memory manipulation isn't about innocent forgetfulness. It's about the deliberate strategic curation of the past to serve a present agenda. This tactic involves intentionally highlighting, exaggerating, or fabricating memories that paint the manipulator in a positive light or support their current argument, while conveniently omitting, downplaying, or denying memories that would assign them blame or contradict their narrative. It's a form of gaslighting that doesn't necessarily invent wholesale lies, but instead edits reality by cherry-picking convenient truths and discarding inconvenient ones, leaving you questioning your own sanity. The manipulator becomes a masterful editor of shared history. They vividly recall every favor they ever did for you, but have complete amnesia regarding the sacrifices you made for them. They remember the one time you raised your voice in frustration, but conveniently forget the weeks of passive aggression or boundary violations that provoked it. They cling fiercely to a minor mistake you made years ago, but dismiss their own repeated betrayals as in the past. They present these fragmented, biased recollections not as opinions, but as objective facts, often stating with unwavering confidence, "That's not how it happened," or "You're remembering it wrong." This tactic is incredibly effective because it attacks the very foundation of your reality, your memory. When someone confidently contradicts your recollection of an event, especially someone you trust or care about, it plants seeds of doubt. Did I remember that correctly? Am I exaggerating? Maybe they're right. You find yourself replaying events, searching for confirmation, feeling increasingly unsure. This confusion is the manipulator's goal. By destabilizing your trust in your own memory, they make you more reliant on their version of the past. In arguments, selective memory becomes a powerful weapon. By controlling the official record of events, the manipulator can consistently frame themselves as the victim or the reasonable party, while painting you as irrational, forgetful, or overly sensitive. Every attempt you make to present the full picture is met with dismissal or further distortion. Over time, this constant battle over the past is exhausting. You may start to avoid bringing up issues altogether, Knowing your memory will be questioned or invalidated, you learn to accept their edited reality simply to keep the peace. Selective memory manipulation doesn't just change the past. It controls the present by making you doubt the very experiences that shaped you. 59. The Unpredictable Jackpot. Imagine playing a slot machine that pays out randomly. Sometimes you win big, sometimes small, sometimes nothing at all for long stretches. It's this very unpredictability that keeps you glued to the machine, pulling the lever again and again, convinced the next big win is just around the corner. Now, apply that same principle to human affection and validation. This is the unpredictable reward system, a potent form of manipulation closely related to intermittent reinforcement. It involves delivering positive reinforcement, like praise, attention, affection, or gifts, inconsistent and randomly, creating a powerful addictive cycle that keeps the target emotionally hooked, confused, and desperately chasing the next jackpot. The manipulation often starts with a period of intense, consistent reward. Similar to love bombing, the manipulator showers you with positive attention, making you feel valued and secure. This establishes a baseline of expectation. Then, the rewards start becoming unpredictable. Affection is suddenly withdrawn without explanation. Compliments cease. Communication becomes sporadic. You feel anxious and confused, wondering what you did wrong. Just as you start to despair, they offer another burst of positive attention. A kind word, a thoughtful gesture, a moment of intense connection. The relief you feel is immense, flooding your brain with dopamine. This hit is often more powerful than the initial consistent affection because it comes after a period of deprivation and uncertainty. This cycle turns the relationship into an emotional slot machine. You become addicted not necessarily to the person, but to the unpredictable highs and the desperate hope of hitting the jackpot again. Your behavior becomes focused on trying to figure out the winning formula. You analyze their moods, modify your actions, suppress your needs, and walk on eggshells, constantly trying to replicate the conditions that led to the last reward. The manipulator maintains control precisely because the rewards are inconsistent. If they were always cruel, you would leave. If they were always kind, you might become complacent. But the unpredictability keeps you perpetually engaged, anxious, and striving for their approval. This dynamic makes it incredibly difficult to break free. You become conditioned to tolerate the lows because the intermittent highs feel so euphoric. You blame yourself for their withdrawal and feel intense gratitude when they offer even the smallest crumb of affection. You forget what stable, consistent positive regard feels like. Accepting the emotional roller coaster is normal. The unpredictable reward system doesn't build trust. It builds obsession, trapping you in a cycle where you're always gambling for the love that was freely given only at the start. 60. The Invisible Rulebook. Imagine navigating a social interaction where you constantly feel like you're breaking rules you didn't know existed. You do something seemingly innocuous, fail to anticipate someone's need, express an opinion they don't share, respond to a text too slowly, and suddenly you're met with coldness, passive aggression, or accusations of being thoughtless or disrespectful. You're left scrambling, apologizing, trying to figure out what unwritten law you violated. This confusing and anxiety-provoking experience is often the result of phantom norms, unspoken, often arbitrary, rules and expectations that a manipulator invents and enforces as if they were universal truths or basic common sense, punishing you for violations you couldn't possibly have anticipated. Phantom norms are a tool for control, disguised as social etiquette or moral standards. The manipulator uses phrases that imply a shared understanding that doesn't actually exist. Everyone knows you're supposed to call after a certain time. It's just basic respect to offer X. I shouldn't have to explain why that's inappropriate. These statements serve to frame their personal, often unreasonable, expectation as an objective standard that you have somehow failed to meet. When you inevitably transgress one of these invisible rules, they react with disappointment, hurt, or indignation, making you feel deficient, socially inept, or morally flawed. This tactic creates a state of perpetual anxiety and hypervigilance. You start walking on eggshells, constantly trying to guess the manipulator's expectations and anticipate their potential reactions. You second-guess your actions, overthink your words, and lose spontaneity, terrified of unknowingly breaking another rule from their invisible handbook. This constant self-monitoring is exhausting and erodes your confidence. You begin to internalize the belief that you are somehow deficient, that you lack common sense, or that you're inherently inconsiderate because you keep finding yourself on the receiving end of their disapproval. What makes phantom norms so effective is their deniability. Because the rules were never explicitly stated, the manipulator can always claim you misunderstood or that the expectation should have been obvious. They avoid direct confrontation while maintaining complete control over the social or relational dynamic. They get to define the terms of engagement without ever having to negotiate them. Recognizing phantom norms means trusting your own sense of what is reasonable and fair. If someone consistently punishes you for breaking rules you were never taught, the problem isn't your lack of understanding. It's their manipulative game.